of this matter, I will allow 15 minutes for this question, and Deputy Renouf will put it to the Minister for Health and Social Services. Deputy Renouf.
Thank you, sir. Will the Minister respond to the issues raised by former health leaders at the Health and Social Security Health Panel hearing on July 10th, particularly relating to public safety, clinical standards and governance?
Minister.
Sir, I'm not looking to question anyone's judgment in this matter, but I am a little surprised to find that this question has passed the test of urgency. And I think the reason for that might become apparent when I explain that my response to those particular issues, public safety, clinical standards and governance, is no different now than it was the last time I commented on them, or than it would have been had the Deputy and his colleagues not chosen to bring these three individuals' views to public attention. My response, sir, is that I'll simply continue to drive fundamental restructuring of the health system, which will make it more efficient and accountable, continue to do all I can to obtain the money required to ensure that the entire service is digitally connected, and I'll carry on building bridges between the remaining factions that need to come together to ensure standards are raised. Finally, sir, subsequent to the recent public hearing focused on our health services, the one additional thing that will require my immediate, unplanned and wholehearted attention is the task of repairing the damage that's been done to public confidence and health staff morale by this carefully organised exercise, the outcome of which was completely predictable, sir.
Supplementary.
Yes, sir. I must say I'm disappointed by the tone the Minister has taken. It is of fundamental significance, I think, that the Minister, the panel should hold two ministers to account. And in fact, I received a letter before, just after the hearings, from the person who helped set up the scrutiny system, saying that this was exactly what the scrutiny system had been designed to achieve. So I'll ask, if I may, as a follow-up, if this is action that if this is all old news to the Minister, can he clearly state what actions he has taken to support his officers in tackling poor behaviours amongst a number of consultants and the culture of resistance to change that has been identified over and over again as so damaging for patient safety?
Minister.
So I haven't got a list of the various things that I've done. I've been in the job for 6 months. It's taken me a while to find my feet, to understand the organisation and to understand the problems. And I've had a series of meetings with management and with clinicians, because if we don't listen to both sides, we're going to get nowhere. And I'm using my best endeavours to bring the threads of those things together. I have to say that the sort of public outcry over this, if it's had one benefit at all, sir, it's the fact that people who would have been perhaps at each other's throats previously are now uniting to actually stand up for one another, because there is some good work going on in the health service. A lot of the storm now is about things that have been revealed that have been going on for a number of years. And what we're simply doing is actually saying, this is what's gone on, these are our findings, and this is how we're going to put it together. There are various reports, there are recommendations that people are going to have access to as of the 18th, Thursday of this week, and those are the recommendations that we'll be implementing, sir.
Deputy Jones.
Thank you, sir. Has the Minister or his Assistant Ministers been contacted and lobbied by clinicians who are opposed to the conclusions of the Massey-Taylor report, or who are opposed to the adoption of NICE clinical guidelines? And if so, how did he respond to this lobbying?
Sir, I've not been lobbied in that specific regard, sir.
Supplementary. Deputy Balash.
Sir, would the Minister agree that the statements of two of the former leaders that they would not seek medical treatment in Jersey were inflammatory, inappropriate, and ought not to have been made?
In simple terms, I would agree wholeheartedly with that statement, sir. And I thank the Deputy for making it.
Deputy Stevenson.
Thank you, sir. Does the Minister agree with the assessment that Jersey's health system is broken and letting islanders and the staff bit is important, and I believe that all three of the health leaders who gave evidence last week did pay tribute to the many staff working in the department and actually say that it wasn't pointing the finger at everybody working within it. Are we letting all those people down? And if he does not agree with that assessment, why not?
Minister.
Would the Deputy be kind enough to explain what she means when she says we are letting these people down? Because it's a slightly confusing question, sir.
Do you want to give that clarification, Deputy Stevens?
As an islander, the question as I've written it, does the Minister agree with the assessment that Jersey's health system is broken and letting islanders and staff down? The staff bit is really important, and if not, why not? I'll take out the we if it's easier.
The staff bit, sir, involves the very people that are delivering the service. And the complication here is that you've got a lot of very good staff doing some very good work in a system that hasn't really had sufficient attention or sufficient money for some considerable period of time. And we're very reliant on the good staff within the system to come together and help to make these things a little better, sir. That's why, if my tone wasn't perhaps as nice as it might have been in relation to what happened last week, it's simply because it really did cause some damage. It did really lower morale, and I've been contacted by a number of people in the service in that regard, and a number of members of the public who also felt that it had done a great deal to diminish people's confidence in what is, I think, a quite fast improving service, sir.
So I don't believe the Minister answered the question. Does he agree with the assessment that Jersey's healthcare system is broken and letting down islanders and staff? And if not, why not?
So it cannot be completely broken because it's still providing a pretty good service. I've said a number of times that it isn't perfect. There are some problems. I've made that very, very plain, and I've said that we're doing everything we can. So is it letting islanders down? I don't think it is. It's providing the best service that it can at this point in time.
Deputy Gardner.
Could I have my supplementary, please?
Yes.
Thank you. There was a clear message from the public hearings that stood out to me last week, that finding common agreement that there's a problem is fundamentally important to be able to move forward. How does the Minister intend to show leadership in this area and help to unite all those that I believe he called different factions in his first answer behind a common goal of improving Jersey's health service?
Minister.
Oh, well, I'm going to start sounding like a broken record. So I've taken a little while to get to grips with what the service is, what it does, who the people are and what their capabilities are. Quite recently at a conference at the town hall, I set out my analysis of what was wrong, and I think a pretty clear statement of intent as to what I want to do about it. And if I'm not wrong, I responded to a member of the public who'd written to all states members over the weekend, and I included a copy of the speech that I gave there. And I think if members have read it, they'll see that there's a pretty clear vision as to what needs to be done. I don't really think I can say a great deal more than that, sir.
Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. As the Minister mentioned, there are still some problems and difficulties within the health service. Would the Minister reassure public and publicly state at this chamber that there is no place in HCS for consultants who will not accept clinical guidance and who will reject findings of the Royal College reports?
Minister.
I think it's fair to say that I would support that, sir. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing my job.
Supplementary.
What steps the Minister will take to ensure that consultants who reject findings of the Royal College reports will not continue with the health service?
Well, as I mentioned before, these things have to be handled quite sensitively, sir. Because what you don't want to find is that you've got a department, a crucial department in the hospital, where people walk out or have taken offence and sort of what are possibly matters that aren't as good as they might be, get worse. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to carry on doing what I'm doing now, trying to set some clear goals, tell people where the health service needs to go, and actually lead that forward. And that's going to involve a series of meetings with people to try and make sure that we bring everybody on board in a sensible, coordinated manner so that we don't make things worse before they get better, sir.
Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I understand the Minister is not an expert and has to rely upon expert advice. But within his corporate management team, or within the corporate management team, as I understand it, within Health and Social Services, is an individual whose post, I understand, is called the Medical Director. Does he have confidence in the individual who ultimately, I suppose, many members would understand complaints are made to? I don't know the circumstances of the post holder, etc. But does he have confidence in whoever is responsible for bringing to the public's attention and to his attention matters of clinical failure?
Minister.
So I think there may be more than just the medical director involved in that. We do have a team at the moment. I can only comment on that which I've seen in the short time that I've been in office. And during the course of that time, and bearing in mind that the first couple of months, it really is just a case of finding your feet. So you're not really capable of making any assessment. But in the time that I've been there and what I've seen, then I can answer that in a positive way, sir.
Supplementary?
Has he taken any soundings about his predecessors, numerous of them, and their experience of the advice that they were getting?
Minister.
No, I have asked around to see if there was any work in hand that might be useful to me, but nothing has been forthcoming, sir.
Deputy Renner, final supplementary. Sorry, Deputy Wilson.
Thank you, sir. Speaking truth to power is often a painful experience and it calls for accountability and transparency at the highest level. Can the Minister accept that these three people who've made these comments about our health service, with years and years of experience, with international reputations, accreditations, clinical backgrounds, senior level positions in health systems, have actually done this? And while he may not agree with all that has been said, does he maintain that the position that they have taken is, or does he support that the position that they have taken was in the interest of patient safety and not a personal attack on himself?
Minister.
So I don't know that I am entirely happy to support that at all. We have to look at people. I've employed an awful lot of people in my time, and I've seen some very impressive CVs, and they haven't always delivered that which one might expect. And I'll just have a quick look at what we're dealing with here. We've got three people. Two of them were, and I'll focus on those two because the other one actually has not had anything to do with Jersey Healthcare since last year. So I'll focus on the other two. But if this is in the public interest and patient safety and staff in the hospital, they made no significant mention at all of the many improvements that are currently underway. And how well qualified they are, I think that's unforgivable, sir. Actually, I've got some other comments, but I think I'll leave it at that, sir. Thank you.
Supplementary?
Thank you, sir. The point is not about saying nice things. The point is about trying to illustrate in helpful ways where things can actually be improved. Does the Minister accept that some of what these three respected individuals have said does have some merit?
Minister.
Nothing very clever about saying that some of it had some merit. So of course it had some merit.
Yes, final supplementary, Deputy Renouf.
So I think a point was raised earlier. You cannot deal with a problem if you don't acknowledge it. And that was a point raised by the people who appeared before the panel. I too was contacted by people after those hearings who were grateful that finally the problem had been so clearly stated without varnish, without being sugar-coated. Part of the leadership role of a minister is surely to set the culture and to set standards. We have a culture of consultants in HCS of resistance to standards that are universally accepted elsewhere. That is why the consultants, the experts spoke out. For the sake of those who do accept those standards, who understand how important they are for patient safety and are trying to implement them within the department, will the Minister unequivocally state that there is no place in HCS for consultants who will not accept clinical guidelines and who reject the findings of Royal College reports, as we apparently hear is going to be the case with radiology?
Minister.
I really am going to be sounding like a broken record. Was the Deputy not listening to the question that I answered from Deputy Gardner? I've already answered this question. I'm very happy to answer it again. It's a very straightforward yes.
Thank you, Minister. Before we start public business, a decision needs to be made up whether to reduce the minimum lodging period in respect of a matter listed on the order paper, New Healthcare Facilities Programme, P.38, lodged by the Hospital Review Panel. Deputy Renouf, do you wish to make the proposition under Standing Order 26.7 that the lodging period be reduced to allow this matter to be debated at this sitting?
Yes, sir, and if I may make a few comments to explain why.
Yes.
I hope members will accept there is a reasonable case for shortening the lodging period for P43, and I do want to keep this short, and if there are any objections, I'll try and deal with them in my summing up. First, I think there is a clear interest from all points of view that a decision about whether or not to hold a separate debate on funding for the new hospital facilities should come as soon as possible. If the Assembly supports the proposition, this will give the Government the necessary time to prepare a separate hospital funding proposition, which will need its own 6-week lodging period, or need its own lodging period. A debate in September would make it difficult, if P43 was successful, for the Government to do the necessary work to come up with a proposition and lodge it before the Government plan debate. Second, it might help if I explain briefly why this proposition was not lodged sooner. The Hospital Facilities Scrutiny Panel was constituted in mid-May. The panel had a private briefing with the Health Minister and the hospital team on the 7th of June, at which the panel raised the question of whether there would be a separate proposition, as had previously been promised. At this point, it was not exactly clear what position the Minister would take, so there was an exchange of correspondence in which the Minister clarified in a letter on June 18th that he would not be bringing a separate proposition. At this point, the panel decided to bring a proposition requesting a standalone debate on hospital funding, which was duly lodged on June the 27th. Members will see from this timeline that the panel worked as quickly as it reasonably could to clarify the situation and then to bring a proposition. The only way we could have lodged a proposition sooner would have been in ignorance of the Minister's position, which we didn't think was right. And finally, I would note that P43 is not in itself a complex proposition. It's not like cannabis or assisted dying, for example, where the issues are exceptionally complex and multifaceted, with an expectation that there may be multiple amendments. I hope that the issues at stake in P43 are acknowledged to be relatively simple and easily understood, and therefore, whilst in general it's not great to shorten lodging periods, in this case, the risk that proper examination of the proposition will not occur is limited. And I would particularly emphasise that should P43 be successful, debating before the recess, this proposition before the recess will allow time for ministers and all members to prepare for the substantive date on hospital funding. So I move the proposition.
Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Joseph.
Sir, I would have, I'm only rising because nobody else wishes to speak. Am I to assume by Minister's silence, and particularly the absence of the Chief Minister, that previously had, I understand it, supported a standalone proposition when he was a backbencher? So without knowing what, if no member of the Council Minister is going to advance a view, then one cannot be informed about the shortening of the lodging period or not.
Deputy Miller?
Sir, thank you. I don't think anything can necessarily be read into the Chief Minister's absence. I think he possibly didn't realise we were going to have this debate quite so soon. I will be rejecting P43 in principle, but I don't feel strongly about whether we shorten the lodging period or not. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition to reduce the lodging period? Deputy Tadier.
Thanks, sir. Whilst I reserve my position on P43 and I listen to the debate and vote accordingly, I think it's important to note that this is a matter of public interest. I think Scrutiny have done a piece of work that's led them to lodging this proposition. It's been informed. Whether or not members ultimately decide they want to go with it is another matter, but it's clearly, I think, meets the test for the reduction of the lodging period, which is in standing orders, and so I'll be happy to support that. I think it's the democratic thing to do. I'll be surprised if any members and ministers decide that they wouldn't do that.
Deputy Wilson.
Thank you, sir. When it comes to using public money to build big infrastructure projects, a lack of transparency on building costs poses significant risks. And one of the things that we want to see as members of the public really is to build public trust and confidence in some of our decision making. So to put this under an intense spotlight and to be able to expand and expose some of the key decisions, the risks and the commitments that are being made, I think I would agree with Deputy Tadier and Deputy Reniff. It is in the public interest, and I would urge members to support this.
I call upon Deputy Reniff to reply.
I'm grateful to those who've contributed, and I thank members for doing so. I think we can move to the vote, if that's okay. If I call for the appel.
The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting on the reduction of the lodging period under Standing Order 26.7. All members have the chance of voting. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. I announce that the proposition has been adopted. 41 votes for, 1 vote contre, and 1 abstention.
Deputy Scott abstained and Deputy Barbara Ward voted contra.
The greffier will preside over the next item.
The next item is the draft Unlawful Public Entertainments Jersey Regulations 2000 P24 of 2024, lodged by the Minister for Sustainable Development, and the main respondent is the Chair of the Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel. The debate resumes following the adoption of the principles on the 11th of June and the subsequent referral to the Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel under Standing Order 72.1. So we return to the matter in hand. How do you wish to propose the regulations, Minister?
Thank you. I'll be proposing them en bloc.
Is that you're making the recommendation?
Oh, sorry. I thought you asked. Sorry, Mum. I thought you asked a straight question. How will I be proposing them? En bloc?
Do you wish to propose them now, then, Minister?
I would like to propose them if that's okay. Thank you very much.
And do you wish to make a speech?
Sorry, I apologise. I was expecting Deputy Tadier to have to say something at some point. That was why I haven't called them in. I rarely am if Deputy Tadier gets to speak, so no, absolutely. So thank you, Mum. Just pull up my notes as well. Apologies. So first of all, I would like to thank the scrutiny panel for their work and for bringing back these regulations in a timely fashion. I'd like to thank them for clearly they've done a good review and got in kind of colloquial terms, got under the bonnet of the issues. And so I'm really pleased with that. And I've been reading the comments paper with interest, and we'll certainly look through their recommendations and decide which of those that we can take forward. With regard to the regulations being proposed today, I'd just like to quickly summarise them. Regulation 1 establishes the bailiff's role in granting permission for public entertainment with conditions and provides for the offence of holding a public entertainment without permission. Regulation 2 gives meaning to those conditions by providing that breaching them is an offence, unless this was out of the organiser's control, having taken all reasonable precautions. Regulation 3 is intended to ensure that a person can be held responsible where the relevant offences are committed by a company or partnership. Regulation 4 clarifies that the regulations do not alter any customary law of offence. And Regulation 5 specifies the expiry date of the regulations as the 20th of July 2027. But as members will know, having read through the comments paper and also heard the debates previously, it is my intention, and certainly the scrutiny panel's wish, that we do not have to renew these on the 30th of July or before the 30th of July 2027. So, with that, I'd like to make the proposition.
Are regulations 1 to 6 seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the regulations? Deputy Joseph.
I'm sorry, Ma'am, if I'm the only person that seems to be putting their light on. I was greatly interested in hearing the scrutiny. I was somewhat perturbed when I was online, I think, and the scrutiny panel called the matter in because it's a relatively simple set of regulations which of course have been before this Assembly on a triennial basis for a number of years. But where I think it's relevant, and perhaps whilst there's not been possible to make any amendments to the regulations, where it is clear is that there is an absence of policy in respect of entertainments. And it is the absence of policy which puts the presiding officer, the bailiff, in a difficult position. He doesn't make, the bailiff doesn't make the decisions, they're upon advice. And they're upon advice on matters of public safety, which is clear. And I thought that my own experience of the bailiffs panel in organising events has been good. But what it, I think, scrutiny, and I'm sure the chair of scrutiny is going to speak, where, and the minister can sum up also, is where they are clearly, in hindsight, deficient, is the absence of a policy. And that's a ministerial policy on entertainments, which can guide the bailiffs panel or whoever authority is ultimately going to be deciding upon whether or not an event is happening, is what sort of policy the island and the democratically elected members of this of the island are going to actually permit. Are they going to permit? This originally was raves. That was a matter of safety because of the link with drugs, etc., as I understand it, in public order. Although alcohol, of course, is another fueling of rave-like events. They've been continued. That was the reason for the original triennial regulations. I well recall the president of the then Home, I think not Home Affairs, but I think it's the whatever president it was bringing forward, then a senator bringing forward the triennial regulations and explaining the reasons that it was raves. We didn't have anything before then. I know that Deputy Sir Philip Balash will be filling in any gaps in relation to that. But it does seem to me that the current arrangements are working well in terms of safety. And the panel, the bailiff convenes, and all the articles are clear in relation to that. But what's missing is a strategy, and a strategy for events and entertainments that is something that the Minister himself, I know, feels very important about. And I think that would be seriously helpful and then could be reflected in any further legislation that's brought forward, because the bailiffs panel, or whoever competent authority, should have regard to a publicly and democratically approved policy of entertainments. That's different from the public safety, which is a matter for experts. Thank you, Ma'am.
Deputy Balash, I saw your light on earlier. Would you like to speak?
Ma'am, I'm slightly sorry that the scrutiny panel has withdrawn its amendment because I was intending to support it. Because I think it is high time that the nettle of dealing with unlawful public entertainment, or dealing with public entertainment indeed, was actually grasped by the Minister. I remember very well when these regulations were introduced for the first time in 1992, because I was the Attorney General at the time, and the urgent problem of the day was illegal raves, where young people would secretly organise large parties in places which were undoubtedly very exciting, but also dangerous. One was held on a cliff edge on the north coast, where there was a serious risk of youngsters falling over and being killed or badly hurt. The problem was how to stop the raves, because nobody, of course, asked the bailiff for permission before a rave took place. And it was impossible very often for the police to find out who was actually in charge. The only means of controlling the situation was to confer a power on the police to seize and ultimately confiscate the amplifiers, speakers, and other expensive equipment which made the fun possible. This was valuable equipment, and many owners did not obviously want it to lose it, and illegal raves were killed stone dead by these regulations. Now, interestingly, the power to seize and forfeit equipment has been omitted from the current draft regulations. I imagine because the power is now contained in the proceeds of crime regulations, or law, which was passed in 1999, or maybe some other legislation. So I'm not sure, sir, that these, ma'am, I'm sorry, that these regulations actually serve any useful purpose. They preserve the customary law offences and the power of the bailiff to license public entertainment. But that adds nothing to what is there already. If the regulations were rejected, the bailiff would still have the power to license public entertainment, subject to appropriate conditions. So, do we need the legislation at all? Well, yes, we do, and possibly for two reasons. But the first reason seems to me to have the greatest importance, and that is to remove from the bailiff the power to license public entertainment. This has been a policy aim for decades, and it is absurd that the nettle has not yet been grasped, and that some agreement has been reached as to who should have the power to license public entertainment in the place of the bailiff. The answer, it seems to me, is that it should be a minister, whether the Minister of Home Affairs or the Minister of Economic Development, whatever he's now called, I'm sorry. One of those two ministers probably fits the bill. And to achieve that end is a one-page or two-page at the most projet de loi. In practice, the minister will have no more to do with licensing public entertainment than does the bailiff currently. It's an administrative function where the bailiff's chief officer or indeed an appropriate senior official in a minister's department can bring together key officials from the police, the fire, health, and other departments to ensure that the event does not constitute a risk to public safety. The only other purpose of legislation and this I think was referred to by Deputy Ozef, and is referred to in the Minister's report as a long-standing desire to develop an alternative route for the management and approval of events in the public domain, including a single centrally managed register to manage the use of public space. I must confess, ma'am, that I have absolutely no enthusiasm for this particular project, which seems to me to involve the creation of lots more work for civil servants, lots more expense to achieve comparatively little. But that's an argument for another day. I'm sorry that the Minister is succeeding in bringing forward legislation, regulations which are going to last for 3 years, which will have the effect only of kicking this matter into the long grass beyond the next elections and failing to deal with a problem which frankly should have been dealt with years ago.
Deputy Tadia.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm just going to start my own timer because I don't have one otherwise for this speech, ma'am. Although it is timed for me, apparently. It's not always the case for the main respondent to have that facility. But they make an exception for me for some reason. Members can be reassured that I won't speak for any longer than necessary. But this is the first review that our newly formed scrutiny panel has conducted and concluded, and it's done so in a short period of time, indeed probably an abridged period of time, given that we would have liked to have had longer to look at this, albeit that it is quite a restricted and finite review compared to potentially some others. And if I can start by addressing maybe some of the comments that Deputy Balash made, because I understand why some members may feel disappointed that the scrutiny panel's amendment has been withdrawn, and I'll perhaps explain why we've done that first of all. So our initial position as a panel was very much that we've said it in our comments, so I'll happily read this out before anyone else points it out. Initially, we said that the panel was confident that the necessary changes could be made within the current terms of government. On looking at it, it's not that we necessarily don't believe that anymore, but we thought it was necessary to actually call this in for greater for information and to have an evidence basis. And that on balance as chair, and I think as a panel, we felt that we had some very good evidence presented to us by the key stakeholders, including the Minister, for which we are very thankful, and we thank all those who attended upon the panel in this time period. That, if I'm honest, it's probably quite marginal to say that the legislative changes that the Minister and the Department needs to make can necessarily be done holistically within the 2-year time frame before the next election. And I think it's important that scrutiny panels are prepared to take their own medicine. So if we say that ministerial propositions need to be evidence-based, then similarly we must make sure that we've got categorical evidence when we're making our recommendations. That doesn't mean, of course, that we don't think the Minister could do this and that the Department, with a fair wind, could bring forward both primary legislation, a framework for a new entertainments law, and the subsequent regulations and secondary law, therefore, that needs to go with it. But we recognise that there will need to be quite a piece of work of consultation that goes on, not simply with industry professionals, but of course with stakeholders in the various parishes. It's important that constables and also I think parishioners are taken along with this. There also needs to be consideration as to what extent other additional legislation, such as alcohol licensing and subsequential changes that might need to be brought forward, are also put into the mix and what is done later on, perhaps as separate considerations. From a personal point of view, I think I owed the Minister a slight apology because the last time I spoke, I probably hadn't fully realised the shortened timescale in which the Minister had inherited this responsibility from Home Affairs, and I know it did used to fall under Home Affairs, so we accept that the Minister's got a piece of work here. Nonetheless, the strong message, if I may turn to the recommendations that we've made during the review, are that we have put forward a number of recommendations which the Minister has already referred to. So if I can take members through those 5 recommendations initially, I think that would be helpful. So the first recommendation is that the Minister, and this is the Minister for Economic Sustainable Development in each case, should, prior to 30th of September this year, and also in consultation with the Bailiffs' Chamber, arrange for clear communication of guidelines for the definition of public entertainments to be put forward to the hospitality industry and published on the relevant pages of the government website. One of the issues that we acknowledge is that there isn't necessarily a clear definition in every case of what entertainment means in every case, and therefore what an act of unlawful entertainment might be. The second recommendation is that the Minister, again in consultation with the Bailiffs' Chambers, should arrange for clear communication of the expectations of what should be included in an application to hold a public entertainments, so that it's easier, a checklist if you like, and again that the information should be forwarded to the hospitality industry and published on relevant pages of the government website. The third recommendation, ma'am, is that the Minister should, in developing any new legislation regarding this area, consider revising the penalties for breaches of the regulations to make them more proportionate. I'll come back to that in a moment. The fourth recommendation is that the Minister should do his utmost to bring both primary and secondary legislation forward for debate during this term of office. So we emphasise that. We were happy to withdraw our amendment on the basis that the Minister, again, should strive to do that. And also, we think that this would be a safeguard contained in recommendation 4. Something we hope the Minister would accept is that he should make a statement to the Assembly if he's unable to achieve this prior to the 2026 election period. And the fifth and final recommendation is that the Minister should, by the end of August this year, indicate by way of a public letter his proposed timeframe for consultation, production of law drafting instructions, debate and implementation on public entertainments, permitting the system and associated legislation. I'm not going to speak, of course, to the whole of the comments paper. That stands in its own right, and members, if they've not had a chance to look at it, can look at it perhaps over the summer holidays if you need a bit of holiday reading. Certainly take that away with you. It should be quite illuminating. Going back to the third recommendation regarding the penalties, one thing I would highlight to members now, because we are, of course, ma'am, talking about the regulations. We've got 6 regulations before us that we need to vote on today. The evidence that we had before us is that the penalties that we're reenacting today for having an event unlawfully is either 6 months imprisonment or a fine or both. And the thing is, whilst the term of imprisonment is limited to 6 months, the fine itself is unlimited. So I think that's questionable. I think the panel has found that actually it seems very disproportionate that you can have an unlimited fine for I say, simply having an event without permission from the bailiff. One suggestion we had from the industry was that actually it might be more effective, and it's something the Minister might wish to consider in the future, is when replacing these penalties potentially, is that actually a ban or a temporary ban on somebody who doesn't have permission or runs an event in a way that isn't perhaps health and safety or law compliant could be a temporary ban for that person. It might be more proportionate and more effective actually than simply a fine. So I do leave the comments there because I think a lot, as I've said, is contained within the workings of and the findings of the paper. I would simply like to thank the scrutiny panel because, as I've said, it's a piece of work which was done in short order. We've had lots of plates being spun at the same time. We've got other reviews that are going on. We have quarterly hearings, of course, which have also been taking place. So I'd like to put on record our thanks as a panel to our scrutiny officer and the administrative support that we've had. I know that he's been very busy, particularly, and this has added to his workload, but I think he's done that in an exemplary way. But also thank you to my panel members who I think have also given their attention to this, and the ministers, and I said the stakeholders who have engaged with this. So in conclusion, I would say and possibly encourage members to, if they do have concerns about any particular regulations, and certainly when it comes to Regulation 1.1 about the levels of fine that can be imposed, I probably won't be supporting that myself. I think I will abstain because we need to have something in place, but I think having an unlimited fine isn't sustainable. And I will also be abstaining on Article 6 to do with the timeline, because I wish to send a message to the Minister that I would strongly encourage him to come forward with this new legislation as soon as possible. And to conclude, as a scrutiny panel, we will be doing our utmost as the critical friend that we are to hold the Minister to his aspiration of bringing in at least a framework, but preferably a whole new piece of legislation to deal with this area, so that we don't have to be in a position of leaving this in the hands of the future Assembly, which may, of course, not be any of us that are currently present. Thank you.
Deputy Scott.
Thank you, ma'am. I'd like to ask a question of the Attorney-General, please. Because I believe, or at least I got the it seemed to be suggested by Deputy Balash that these regulations wouldn't change the law in any way, unless I misunderstood that. So I just wondered if the Attorney-General could just confirm that, or just respond to that, and if these regulations weren't passed, what difference would it make?
Mr. Attorney-General.
Ma'am, yes, I'm happy to answer that question. What these regulations do, ma'am, is to establish a statutory offence, which is an alternative to an existing customary law offence. So they don't abolish the customary law, and under customary law, yes, the bailiff did have a customary law power to control unlawful public entertainments. There is a difference between the statutory power and the customary law power in that the sentence for contravening the customary law offence is at large, which means it's undefined. Theoretically, there could be a sentence of imprisonment of a very significant sentence of imprisonment, whereas the statutory offence, it defines the maximum sentencing powers of the court as a term of imprisonment of 6 months and an unlimited fine. So that is a difference to the customary law offence, where the sentence is at large. So that is perhaps the only relevant difference between the customary law offence and the statutory one in these regulations.
Thank you. Did you wish to continue your speech, Deputy?
Yes, thank you, ma'am. So having heard, and thank you to the Attorney-General for clarifying this position, I hope that States members do accept that these regulations do provide for a more proportionate response to a breach, and therefore will give the regulations their support.
Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Wilson.
Thank you, ma'am. I'd just like to comment on the review process itself, which was my first scrutiny review, and to formally thank Deputy Tadier for his leadership of it, and also fellow panel members and scrutiny officers. There were some doubts as to why the review was undertaken, but as you've heard from Deputy Tadia, it enabled greater insight into the purpose and intention behind the regulations and why things needed to change. And as we've heard from Deputy Balash so eloquently in the way he summarised those. But I just want to reiterate that as a panel, we will hold the Minister to account for his timetable and the way in which he has committed to bringing forward new laws. We've learnt a lot. It's been a very fast-paced piece of scrutiny, and I think we've demonstrated that it can be done and that there are some interesting perspectives which we hope we could share with others in terms of being able to support ministers to develop their legislative programme. We don't believe that working under pressure has actually reduced the quality of the review process. And one of the things that we are pleased is that we have developed an evidence base for this, which is relevant to moving things forward. Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? If no other member wishes to speak, I close the debate on the regulations and call upon the Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mum, and thanks to all members who have spoken in that in the debate. I'll start in the order that the points were raised. Deputy Joseph asked about policy, and he is, I believe, absolutely correct. There is an absence of policy around this, and that's certainly something that I'll be seeking to bring in with the laws towards at the end of this term. I think it is correct. Similarly to licensing, liquor licensing law, the States has not really provided a policy framework around the laws, and that does need to be changed. Deputy Balash, I must admit I was slightly wounded by Deputy Balash's comments because I absolutely have grasped the nettle. This, as Deputy Tadia mentioned, these regulations did not sit under the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development until September last year. They've always sat under the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs, but precisely because change had been promised but never delivered in that department with regard to these regulations. In economic development, where we were being asked by industry particularly, we need new regulations in this area, we need a better framework for holding events. We formally requested the transfer of these regulations from Home Affairs to Economic Development, which I'm really pleased that that transfer took place late last year, in September last year. As a result, I am now bringing forward these regulations for what will be the last time. My department is already working on the new regulations, and it is our intention entirely to, as we have said, definitely bring forward the primary law this term, but make every effort to bring forward the regulations as well this term. And it is only from a perspective of caution, because as with any law drafting, and when I say law drafting, I mean that any creation of new laws, I'm not speaking specifically about law drafting, any creation of new laws, there are elements of that which are definitely outside the Minister's control. And as a result, I didn't want to sit and make promises about timelines when I knew a lot of those timelines were not in my control. And that was the only reason for that caution. And I'm really grateful that in their review, perhaps I'm reading into it a little bit, but I believe the scrutiny panel have, through their review, understood why I was erring on the side of caution and therefore asking for the full 3 years. It's not in any way to kick this into touch. It's not in any way to kick the can down the road. It is absolutely grasping the nettle and saying, now that I am Minister and finally that I have hold of these regulations, I am bringing changes to these laws. I hope that Deputy Balash will leave the chamber with a different opinion of my ability to grasp nettles than the one he entered with. Deputy Tadia, thank you, and thank you to the scrutiny panel as well for their hard work on this. And there's no doubt in my mind that the review, which is of high quality, will help inform the future regulations as well, and the new kind of legal framework for holding events in Jersey. That, of course, goes to Deputy Wilson as well for her work on that panel. And Deputy Scott, thank you very much for asking the Attorney General question. It's very kind. Thank you. Mum, with that, I was going to propose the regulations en bloc when I was misunderstanding the question earlier, but given Deputy Tadier's request on Articles 1 and 6, if we could take Articles 1 and 6 separately and the rest en bloc. Thank you.
Very well. So if members would like to return to their seats, and the voting will shortly open on Regulation 1 only. I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have had an opportunity to cast their vote, I'll ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that the Regulation 1 has been adopted. There were 46 votes for and 1 abstention. Give the greffier a moment to reset the system. Are you content to take Articles 2 to 5 en bloc?
Yes, ma'am.
So if the greffier would open the voting and members can vote on Regulations 2 to 5. All members have had an opportunity to cast their votes. I'll ask the greffier to close the voting. And those regulations have also been adopted, 46 votes for and 1 abstention. Greffier.
Deputy Tadier abstained.
And finally, Regulation 6. If greffier could open the voting. If all members have now cast their vote, I'll ask the greffier to close the voting. And Regulation 6 has been adopted, 45 votes for and 1 abstention. So the regulations have been adopted. We move to the matter in third reading.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you wish to propose the regulations in third reading?
I do wish to propose the regulations in third reading, and just to thank all members for their contributions, ma'am. I would also, if I'd just like to say, because I have to, because I have to mention it, is following my history of the regulation being passed from one department to the other, the former Home Affairs Minister, Deputy Miles, just pointed an email to me where in October 22, where she asked me if I would take over the regulations, ma'am, rather than me asking her, so apologies there. We believe that that was the formal order in which things happened. Thank you.
Are the regulations seconded in third reading? Yeah. Does any member wish to speak? Deputy Oser.
So, ma'am, I wonder whether the Minister in the third reading would commit in advance of the government plan to bring forward, he said kindly that there is not a policy which one can point to in relation to events, and would he in the advance of the government plan, so that members can understand where public money is going in public events, bring forward something that actually is understandable and explainable in terms of what the policy of his department is. And I include the responsibility for his department allocating money to the I don't know what they're called non-government, non-something organisations, but in other words, Jersey, Sport Jersey, Visit Jersey, etc., because there is an overall issue that his department is responsible for, which seems to me it's a multiple of what it was when years ago when economic development started. And I wonder whether or not it would be helpful for him to say now he's accepted there's no policy. Could he bring something in advance of the government plan? Thank you.
Does any other member wish to speak? Deputy Tadier.
Ma'am, I rise just to say that now that the work has been scrutinised, and this is kind of the process that should ordinarily happen for all legislation, and that's why it's important. I think that laws are lodged to allow for scrutiny to take place. We hope that this is, of course, the last time that we need to debate these regulations ever in Jersey, and that the next time that this issue is before the Assembly, it's because we've got a completely new law in place with a new set of regulations and a new apparatus in place to do the work. I will say at the moment it's going to be incumbent on the Minister to reassure everybody who might have used the entertainment facilities, for want of a better word, or this law, and the bailiffs department, because we received evidence on the one hand which said that the system works very well, and so of course there'll be a need to convince people why change is necessary, notwithstanding the fact that there have already been some very good points made about the archaic way that this sits, perhaps with the customary powers of the bailiff, when the bailiff is also the civic head of the island. Yesterday we saw that very clearly. He's got other roles to do that don't involve the Parliament directly, that also involve the courts, and that may not mean that he is the best place to be dealing with administrative matters of this way. But we're also mindful of the way that it is a very streamlined system, that for £40 for an entertainment licence, you probably get quite a lot for your money in terms of value. And on the other hand, we do have an industry, not simply the Hospitality Association, but we know that event organisers can also be individuals. They may be inexperienced on occasions who are not doing it for commercial reasons, who wish to have a system in place which is administrative and as straightforward as possible and fit for the 21st century. So in adopting this in the third reading, ma'am, we hope that it is the last time we will need to give consent to these triennial regulations, because I think that whoever's in post, either as Minister or in scrutiny next time, would probably not tolerate another iteration of this form of customary law being brought forward, or this rather antidote to customary law being lodged in this way.
So any other member wish to speak on this matter in third reading? No other member wishes to speak. I close the debate and I call on the Minister to reply.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm going to pick up Deputy Tadier's last sentence, I think it was, an antidote to customary law. I don't believe customary law is toxic, therefore I don't believe it needs an antidote, so to speak. I'm quite relaxed about the fact that Jersey still operates customary law in different areas, but I don't think that was the point the Deputy was necessarily trying to make, but I suddenly ran through the logic of that statement. Absolutely, as Deputy says, I really, really want this to be the very last time that these triennial regulations are brought to the Assembly. It's a long time since illegal raves were a problem on the cliffs, and we need to move to a different way of doing these things. With regard to the comments by Deputy Ozef, I cannot make the commitment Deputy Ozef is asking for, and the reason is because Deputy Ozef has gone from asking for an events policy to asking for a written statement about the grant funding of all arm's length organisations. That is absolutely not the same thing as an events policy and has nothing to do with an events policy. I'm afraid so, Deputy Ozef, so that's not a commitment I can make in regard to an events policy. An events policy will be looking at events, the framework under which they are allowed to take place or not allowed to take place. That's what an events policy is, and possibly could have something in there about the types of events that Jersey would prefer to hold or not hold. Thank you, Mum. With that in mind, I do thank members for their help with this, and I do ask that the proposition be taken forward. Thank you, Mum.
Do you call for an appel?
Why not, Mum? Yeah.
The appel has been called for. I also ask members to return to their seats and for the greffier to open the voting on this matter in third reading. All members have cast their votes. Ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that the regulations have been adopted, 46 votes for and 1 abstention.
Can we have the one abstention?
Greffier.
Deputy Ozef abstained.
Next item is the draft Sea Fisheries Minimum Size Limits Jersey Amendment Regulations 2000, P.32 of 2024, lodged by the Minister for the Environment. And the main respondent is the Chair of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel. And I ask the Greffier to read the citation.
Draft Sea Fisheries Minimum Size Limits Jersey Amendment Regulations 2000. The states make these regulations under Articles 2 and 6 of the Sea Fisheries Jersey Law 1994.
Minister.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, the Sea Fisheries Jersey Law 1994 provides the framework for regulating sea fishing and conserving fish in our waters. Under that legislation, the Sea Fisheries Minimum Size Limits Jersey Regulations 2001 is the regulation which controls the minimum size by which fish and shellfish can be landed, offered for sale, sold or retained by fishermen, or indeed anyone, within Jersey's territorial seas for fisheries management purposes. The proposed amendment to increase the minimum size from 87mm to 88mm carapace length for lobster is a small but simple and sensible and effective change. And before members go reaching for their notes, a carapace is the rigid section of the shell covering the body and is measured from the top, from the start of the eye socket to the start of the tail. The use of minimum size restrictions, sir, on the landing, sale and retention of fish and shellfish is a tried and tested management measure employed in fisheries management across the world. The rationale is simple in that the minimum size allows a species to reproduce at least once, but often multiple times, prior to recruitment to a fishery or to being caught. It works well, particularly with shellfish that are robust and have high survival levels after capture and release, like lobster. Lobster, sir, is a mainstay of our commercial fleet and is part of the island's cultural and culinary identity. Lobster fishing had a boom in between 2017 and 2019, where nearly every other pot would produce a lobster that could be landed for sale. Now, however, catch levels have returned closer to those of a decade ago, where only 1 in 6 pots has a lobster to land. Working with representatives of the commercial and recreational fishing fleet and marine resources officers, a suite of management measures has been proposed to safeguard and rebuild the stock. And I'd like to put on record my thanks to the members of the Lobster Working Group for all their contribution and commitment to designing this package. Increasing the minimum landing size forms the keystone of these measures, and so is the first to be introduced. Further measures, as outlined in the recent lobster report published earlier this year by my department, will follow in due course. But this small increase will apply to all those wishing to retain lobster, commercial or recreational, fishing in our waters. The proposed change will also support the continued viability of our sustainably certified lobster fishery under the Marine Stewardship Council, a certification we jointly share with our Norman neighbours. So I've also taken this opportunity to remove outdated allowances relating to tuna and swordfish in line with modern best practice and in support of our work to join the Regional Fisheries Management Organisation that manages these species on an international level known as ICAT, or International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tuna. I hope members will agree that these are sensible, scientifically robust and stakeholder-supported measures that seek to further enhance the conservation and management of this important local species. I ask members to support this amendment and propose the principle, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Are the principles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Moreau.
Thank you, sir. It is just to ask the Minister, I'll just I'll wait a bit because I can see the Minister's distracted, but I'd like to ask the Minister a question really. It's just I'd be grateful if the Minister could provide greater detail around the exemptions for the bluefin tuna and the swordfish. As I understand it, it's saying that the exemptions at the moment are about bycatch, and so would this therefore mean that it is not allowable to take any tuna or swordfish, even as bycatch? Is that, I'm not asking for any political purpose here, it's just purely for understanding. Is that the kind of the sum of the regulations in that respect? Thank you, sir.
Does any other member speak on the principles? Conor Thompson Saviour.
Thank you, sir. In a similar vein, sir, I was just curious if the Minister could inform members how this aligns with our Norman neighbours with their rules and regulations. Thanks.
I call upon the Minister to reply. Minister.
Thank you, sir, and I'm grateful for the two questions, which I'm pleased to clarify. The Marine Stewardship Council is a certification, MSC certification, which is known across Europe, and hopefully will allow our fishermen to sell their product for an enhanced price. It's work that we do with our Norman neighbours, and we have done for some time, and I believe we'll be renewing that again in the not too distant future. As for Deputy Morel, sir, he's quite right. I am removing from this this regulation the ability to land tuna and swordfish as a bycatch, as he quite rightly says. Tuna can't be caught currently anyway because they are now on the wildlife list, and in the case of swordfish, the area that swordfish inhabit at the moment is from the southern Portuguese coast out into the Atlantic, so theoretically possible, but very, very unlikely. The advantage of being able to remove these two lines out of the legislation now is that it very much enhances our ratification with ICAT, which is something we really want to do in order to make use of tuna. If they should enter our waters, we may be able to do some scientific work with them in the future. Potentially, if there's enough of a population, even do some catch and release and enhance the local fishing fleet's ability to make some money. I hope that helps, sir.
Those in favour of adopting the principles kindly show. Thank you very much. The principles are adopted. Deputy Jeune, does the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel wish to scrutinise this matter?
No, sir.
Thank you very much. Minister, how do you wish to propose the regulations in second reading?
Could I propose them all block, please, sir?
Yes. Are the regulations seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the regulations? Those members in favour of adopting the regulations kindly show. Thank you very much. The regulations are adopted in second reading. Minister, do you wish to propose the matter in third reading?
I do, sir, and I'm almost disappointed that there's more questions. I wanted to talk about the use of pot markers, the maximum sizes that we might restrict fishermen from landing lobsters, the number of pots in our sea, and the age that lobsters start to reproduce. But I'll save members that, sir, and just ask for the vote on the third reading. Thank you.
Is the matter seconded in third reading? Does anyone wish to speak in third reading? Deputy Morel.
I was just wondering if the Deputy might enlighten us as to some of the points that he dangled in front of the Assembly, sir, and I'm sure we would all like to know more.
Does any other member wish to speak in third reading?
Sir.
Just
would the Minister please confirm the size of the lobster held by the Queen yesterday?
Good question. Does any other member wish to speak in third reading? Deputy Fully.
So in summing up, would the Minister remind us of the punchline to the joke, which goes that the lobster came into a bar and the barman said, "I'm sorry, I'm not going to serve you."
Anyone else? I call upon the Minister to reply. Minister.
Thank you, sir. And because I don't know the answer to Deputy Tadier's question, I'm just going to say this is a very serious subject and I don't make light of it. As for the lobster held by Her Majesty yesterday, I'm assured that it must have been over the minimum landing size, otherwise it wouldn't have been on land. And in response to Deputy Moyle, I might tempt members with a couple of pieces of information. Lobsters come to breeding size at about 80 millimetres in carapace length, so increasing that size further will allow the lobsters that are in the sea to reproduce a number of times before they're caught. I'd be looking to maybe set a maximum size of 135, which is a substantial size of lobster, but if one would be lucky enough to get to that size, it can be returned to the sea after being caught, possibly after being tagged and noted. Members might like to know that in the lobster report issued earlier this year that there is the potential for over nearly 75,000 lobster pots in our territorial water, which I found quite an interesting and large figure, and certainly I think that we have the ability to reduce down to around 50,000 without having any effect on the industry. But certainly there are other measures that we could put in place, and I very much look forward to bringing them to the Assembly to try to sustain the lobster stock as much as I possibly can for the benefit of everybody, especially the local fishing fleet. Thank you,
So would
sir.
the Minister give way before he finishes?
Are you prepared to give way?
Aye, of course, sir.
I'm sure it slipped his mind, but of course the lobster, he says, you come in here, giving it all this.
Thank the Deputy for his answer, sir, and ask for the vote.
The appel has been called for? Do you call for the appel?
Yes, sir, thank you. I'd like to have the appel.
Invite members to return to their seats. And ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have had the chance of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. And the regulations have been adopted unanimously. 41 votes for. The next item is the draft States of Jersey Deputy Chief Minister Amendment Law lodged by the Chief Minister. The main respondent is the Chair of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel. I invite the greffier to read the citation.
Draft States of Jersey Deputy Chief Minister Amendment Law 2000, a law to amend further the States of Jersey Law 2005 to provide for the delegation of functions to and the resignation of the Deputy Chief Minister and for connected purposes. The States, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty in Council, have adopted the following law.
The Chief Minister will propose the principles. Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. This amendment to the States of Jersey law has been lodged alongside an amendment to standing orders. So collectively, these proposals would allow for the delegation of legal functions from the Chief Minister to the Deputy Chief Minister, and for the Deputy Chief Minister to be held accountable to the states for any such delegated functions. This would mirror the existing arrangements for Assistant Ministers to the Chief Minister, and indeed in respect of an Assistant Minister to any other Minister. The amendment law also addresses a lacuna in the current law which presently allows the appointment and dismissal of the Chief Minister, but not for the resignation of the Deputy Chief Minister. So as a comparison, the law currently includes resignation provisions for the Chief Minister, Ministers and Assistant Ministers. So it's just the Deputy Chief Minister for who the exception presently exists. I assure members that this particular amendment to the law is to ensure consistency and good order, and is no way to be taken as a hint, nudge or encouragement to the incumbent. Far from it, in fact, and indeed these are proposals that have been picked up and finalised from the work that has taken place under previous governments. The amendment also denotes a number of articles in the States of Jersey law which are now spent and no longer relevant, and I can come to those in a little more detail in the second reading should members wish, sir. This amendment simplifies and clarifies the position, ensuring that the Chief Minister can delegate responsibilities directly to the Deputy Chief Minister on the same basis that can be done for any other Assistant Minister. So just to confirm that. And with this additional responsibility, of course, come the associated accountability. And this is delivered through the related amendment to standing orders, which I will speak to, sir, in P.34. Can I just note and thank the scrutiny for their comments, sir, which have been noted, sir, and are helpful. And after that, sir, I move the principles of the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Minister. Are the principles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the principles? If no member wishes to speak on the principles, those members in favour kindly show. Thank you very much. The principles are adopted. Deputy Miles, does the Corporate Services Screening Panel wish to scrutinise this matter?
No, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Chief Minister, how do you wish to propose the articles in second reading?
I would like to propose the articles on block, so I'm happy to cover them very briefly. It will take about a minute. Articles 1 and 2 are the interpretation provisions. Articles 3 and 4 in the 2005 Law 5, Articles 5A and 21B make the transitional provision. Article 5 of the amendment substitutes Article 24 of the law. So this is to include provision for the Deputy Chief Minister to resign from the office in writing to the Chief Minister and for notice to be given to the states in such a scenario. Article 6 of the amendments amends the heading of Article 25, sir, better to reflect the context of the article, which includes provision for assistant ministers to resign as well as being appointed and dismissed, sir. Article 7, 9 and 10 make minor consequential amendments to account for Article 28 on the power to delegate functions being split into two separate articles covering the Chief Minister and ministers separately, sir. And thank you. I propose in the second reading.
Are the articles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Does any member wish to speak on the articles in second reading? Those in favour of adopting the articles in second reading kindly show. Thank you. The articles are adopted in second reading. Chief Minister, do you wish to propose the matter in third reading?
Yes, please, sir. Thank you. There shouldn't be anything particular to mention at third reading now, but I would just like... Oh, thank you, sir. There's nothing in particular in addition to mention in third reading, but I would like to take the opportunity, sir, to thank all those involved in preparing the amendment, the drafting office, law officers, the previous and current corporate services panel, sir, and of course the previous government, and I made the proposition in the third reading. Thank you. Have the appel, please, sir.
Well, and it's been seconded. Is the matter seconded in third reading?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the articles as adopted in third reading? The appel has been called for. I invite members to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. Four members have the chance of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the law has been adopted in third reading, 41 votes for, no votes contra and no abstentions. The next item is amendments to standing orders, Deputy Chief Minister, lodged by the Chief Minister, and the main respondent is the Chair of the Privileges and Procedures Committee. I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The states are asked to decide whether they're of opinion to make the following amendments to the standing orders of the states of Jersey with immediate effect.
Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. The Deputy Chief Minister has formally had to do so. No, bear with me, sir.
Right, sir, thank you. Standing orders currently allow for an assistant minister to propose a proposition of the council where they have delegated responsibility, and or for an assistant chief minister to propose a proposition to the chief minister. So if the deputy chief minister were permitted to receive delegated functions on the same basis as the assistant ministers, as previously discussed, sir, it is logical for the deputy chief minister to be permitted parallel permission to act as rapporteur in that capacity, sir. As part of these changes to the role of Deputy Chief Minister, and given that the Deputy Chief Minister is a member of the Council of Ministers, it is seen as appropriate to place the same restrictions in respect of nominations and elections to scrutiny panels on the Deputy Chief Minister, sir, as apply to the Chief Minister, sir. This is achieved through an amendment to the Standing Order 120, which then has a consequential impact on Standing Order 120 1A, sir. The panels impacted are corporate services and economic and international affairs, sir. So I move the amendment. Thank you.
Is the amendment seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member speak on the proposition to amend standing orders? Those in favour of adopting the proposition kindly show. Thank you. The proposition is adopted and the standing orders are amended. The next item is P.38, draft the Employment Minimum Wage and Benefits in Kind Amendment Law, lodged by the Minister for Social Security, and the main respondent is the chair of the Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel. I invite the Greffier to read the citation.
Draft Employment Minimum Wage and Benefits in Kind Jersey Amendment Law 2000, a law to exclude requirements from applying to the making of an order before 1st of April 2026, prescribing the hourly rate of the minimum wage or amounts relating to benefits in kind. The State, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty in Council, have adopted the following law.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. In November 2021, the previous Assembly set a target of raising the minimum wage to 2/3 of average median wages. In our Common Strategic Policy document, this government, and by its approval of that Common Strategic Policy, this State's Assembly has taken the decision to make that target a reality. And this amendment to legislation enables me to set rates over the next 2 years to fulfil that commitment. I'm very pleased to be supported by the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development, who is working with employer representative groups to develop a transitional support package for employers with low-wage employees. Given that it's a political commitment that has been made, it wouldn't be appropriate to ask the Employment Forum to consult, and that is why this amendment is time-limited and temporary. This amendment automatically falls away at the end of March 2026, and all the provisions in the employment law which require the Minister to direct the Forum to consult on minimum wage rates will apply again. I recognise that some members will have doubts about the course I am proposing with this amendment, but it is the most effective way of ensuring both the Assembly's and the Government's commitment to those on the lowest wages is met within a realistic timescale. One piece of consistent feedback that we have heard from employer representatives is to provide certainty at the earliest opportunity of what rates will be. This is what this proposition will enable me to do. Sir, I commend the proposition to the Assembly and maintain the principles.
Thank you, Minister. Are the principles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the principles? Yes, Deputy Ferry.
Thank you, sir. Along with my friend and colleague in front of me, Deputy Barbara Ward, we spent 9 years on the Employment Forum, and during that time we consulted regularly, obviously every year, on minimum wage. And although it was a very rewarding part of the work, there were other employment issues that could have taken precedence and could have affected in a positive way a lot more workers in Jersey. So we understood that it was a necessity to complete the review of minimum wage each year. And indeed, at one point, we did consider having a 2-year recommendation for the minimum wage to give businesses that surety and to be able to plan for the next 2 years. And we never found that the economic conditions were right to be able to make a 2-year recommendation. So although at the time I was really keen to push that forward and allow the forum to consult on wider employment issues, we never got to that end point. So all that I would ask of the Minister is, if this proposition does get accepted, that she uses that time, that 2-year time frame, effectively to put the forum to really good use and unleash them on some works that perhaps they wouldn't have had the opportunity to do so otherwise. And I'm aware that they're currently working on whistleblowing provisions, and I'm sure they'll have an in-depth consultation and recommendation on that. But perhaps a full review of the family-friendly legislation might be appropriate at this time to see if the Employment Forum can recommend further positive changes to increase the provision of family-friendly legislation in Jersey. And also, earlier this morning, we were talking about 0 hours contracts. It could be a good time to have a proper consultation on 0 hours contracts to see what is working and what can be improved. I know that 0 hours contract was always a favourite of Deputy Barbara Ward, so I'm sure she'd like to see that come to fruition. In relation to the offsets, I'm aware from all those consultations that we had over the years that the 2 main areas or industries that are affected by minimum wage are, of course, agriculture and hospitality. And, of course, the offsets are a mechanism that they have to make a difference when the rate goes up. Now, we looked at increasing the offsets above the rate of minimum wage to allow for that flexibility for employers in those industries. But actually, what we found at the time, and I still believe this to be the case, is very few employers in those industries use the offsets to their maximum as it stands. So I don't think that mechanism will work unless things have dramatically changed, because such is the competitiveness of the workers in the agricultural industry in particular, that most employers just cannot use the offsets to their maximum. So I don't think that will have the desired effect. But we can try it, and if employers understand how to use them properly, as long as the employer is not financially disadvantaged from where they are now. Because all that will happen otherwise is those workers will take themselves off to another farm that doesn't maximise the use of the offsets. So I think it will find its own level. But generally speaking, if this does get adopted, I think it will give the Employment Forum a lot more time and space to do changes, or put forward recommendations, changes to the employment law that will make a difference for a lot of workers in Jersey. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Jeune.
Thank you, sir. And I'm really pleased that Deputy Ferry was able to go before me, because one of the questions, I really have more questions than anything else to the Minister, was about what the Employment Forum says on this matter. It would be good to hear, and it was good to hear from the Deputy about this, but it'd be really useful to hear from the Minister what her conversations with the current Employment Forum and how they feel about this particular proposition. Will there also be consultation on the whole package that will come with the Economic Development Minister? Will this whole package be consulted at some point, or will this mean that because it's in the CSP, it will not be consulted at all in the round? It would be useful to know. And third, this question came to me as Deputy Ferry was talking about some of the kind of ways that potentially could be tweaked in the future around the employment forum and looking at the subject of minimum wage. What happens in March 2026? Will you also be using this time between now and then to also maybe amending as such, or using that opportunity to see how that will change in the future, or will it go back to what it was before? And then, of course, as we've heard from Deputy Ferry, there are some things that is concerns around that, around what happens at the moment. So could we use the time to amend it and become more efficient as well into the future? Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on the principles? Deputy Balash.
So my party, the Jersey Liberal Conservatives, like the Reform Party and indeed many independent members, are in favour of the principle of making the minimum wage a living wage. And as the JLC stated in its manifesto, a living wage is important for workers' self-respect. It should not be necessary for wages to be supplemented by the government. But I have to say that the agricultural industry is deeply concerned about the haste with which the government is moving to introduce the living wage. The retail prices index has advanced by 26% between March 2021 and March 2024. The minimum wage has increased during the same period by 40%. Farmers' incomes have not increased by anything like 40%. I don't have the figures, but I doubt that they have in fact increased even to the extent of the RPI. The supermarkets have rigorous price controls. The farmers are being squeezed. Their costs are rising hugely, but their incomes are not. And they are in a different position from the hospitality industry and even the retailers, where there is at least the opportunity to increase incomes by putting up prices. Yet the government appears to be adopting a one-size-fits-all approach. So I heard the Minister this morning say that she had been consulting with the agricultural industry. I hope that the Jersey Farmers Union has been included in that consultation. And I hope that the Minister will, if this proposition is adopted and the farmers no longer have the opportunity of going to the employment forum to articulate their concerns, will listen personally to the concerns which they have. The agricultural industry, it doesn't need to be said, really, is so important to this community and to this island. And it would be a catastrophe if some members of the industry were pushed into a position where they felt that it was not economically possible to continue. That must be avoided. And I look to the Minister for assurances that she will, if this proposition is adopted, consult very fully with all those who have responsibility for the well-being of the agricultural industry.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on the principles? Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. And I would like to echo Deputy Balazs's comments about consultation and add to the list a construction council that I have had meeting with them, and they express great concern. Again, myself, I voted and I do support living wage, and it is something that's important. Saying this, the concerns that were raised by the construction council that is specifically also around the apprenticeship, because the apprentices who are much needed in the construction councils and the living wage would be required to be paid, they need to be sure and assured that their concerns will be met and they will get also included in the consultation and the solution will be found, because from their perspective, if it's needed to be looked at as well.
Thank you, Deputy. Colin Tarbison-Brillard.
Thank you, sir. I too flag up warnings that government interference in private enterprise is never a good thing. We are at the situation in the island at the moment, so where it's actually very difficult to get staff, and unless staff are paid a reasonable wage, well, you simply won't have any. So I do regard this interference as superfluous at this present time. Notwithstanding that, sir, I don't believe that the public should support businesses who don't pay a reasonable rate, but I just counsel care and don't feel I can sensibly support this proposition at the moment. Thank you, sir.
I call upon the Minister to reply. Minister.
Thank you, sir. I will try and answer all the questions that I've been asked. Firstly, Deputy Ferry, I wholeheartedly agree with your sentiment that the time of the employment forum during this 2 years should be utilised at its best to effectively look at what other areas of employment legislation can be consulted upon. And as you quite rightly said, they are currently looking at the whistleblowing legislation, which has been approved, which we agreed within the Assembly to move forward with. I understand where the Deputy was coming from with regard to offsets. I have also heard that in some industries offsets aren't being used to their fullness. However, that was one thing that I heard loud and clear from the industry representatives that we have consulted with already. Deputy Jeanne asked me what the Employment Forum view was. I have met with the chair of the Employment Forum twice. When I met with her last week, I discussed this particular proposition, and she brought no concerns to me about it. She also feels that this next 2 years can be put to good use, and the forum can use this time to concentrate on other matters. She also recognised that this is a political decision that has been taken, and in essence, it wouldn't be a good use of time for the forum to undertake a consultation on a decision that we have already made politically to move forward with. So I hope that answers the Deputy's questions that she asked me. I understand Deputy Balazs's points about the agricultural industry. Yes, I have met with the Jersey Farmers Union twice myself. I know that the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development and his team have also been meeting with them, and in the packages that they will be bringing forward, they will be considering how they can make this transition appropriate and help this incredibly important industry. Deputy Gardner, to answer Deputy Gardner's question, I haven't personally met with the Construction Council. I will endeavour to find out whether the Economic Development Minister's team has done so, and if they haven't been consulted with to date, I will ask that they are added to that list. Constable Jackson commented that there are businesses that are currently finding it difficult to get staff. One of the things that I think is most important about us moving to a living wage here is actually our competitiveness as a jurisdiction and being known as a jurisdiction where people can afford to live. We know that we have a high cost of living, and I think moving towards a living wage is an important element of that. I have just realised, sir, that I hadn't answered all of Deputy Jean's questions. She asked about what was happening during this 2-year period, and I think Deputy Ferret also alluded to this. We will be undertaking some work around minimum income standards so that we can have better data and better information available to us about what it actually costs to live on the island on a day-to-day, and then what actually a reasonable income standard to live on the island will be. That will then enable us over this 2-year period to then think through how we work with the Employment Forum on an ongoing basis, and then the appropriate method of consultation that they may take forward post this change elapsing. So I hope that answers everybody's questions, and I ask the Assembly to support me in this matter so that I can move forward and deliver on the decisions that we have already made. Thank you.
Is the appeal called for?
Yes, sir.
Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting on the principles. All members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting.
So I'm afraid my device is not working. My be permitted to vote verbally.
I'm afraid not. I don't think that's possible until the vote's closed. And I can announce that the principles have been adopted. 32 votes pour, 8 votes contre, and 3 abstentions.
So may we have the contra and the abstentions, please?
Yes.
So those voting contre online, Deputy Andrews and Deputy Dublé, and those voting in the Assembly, the Connotabs of Grouville and St Juan, Deputies Balash, Moore, Miles and Wilson. And the abstentions were the Connotab of St Brallard, Deputy Joseph and Deputy Scott.
Sir, may I raise a point of order?
Yes.
I think this is a relevant time to make a point of order because I was not here for the start of the debate, and I don't know whether any conflicts of interest statements were obtained or made, and I abstained because I would have made a declaration of interest that I have an interest in a business that potentially is affected by this.
Thank you very much.
And I would invite other members to do the same.
Do the Health and Social Security panel wish to scrutinise this matter? Deputy Dublé?
No, sir.
No, thank you. Deputies Rose Binney, you wish to make a declaration? Or?
Yes, sir. I have an interest in the business that can be affected by the recent proposition.
And Deputy Tom Binney?
I have to say the same, sir.
So, now, in relation, are you asking for a ruling in relation to the nature of the interests you have, or not?
Indeed, I am, so to have an interest in the business, but no employees are paid at the minimum or living wage rate. I'm not quite sure what it is that the declaration that members are making is.
Yes, well, let me remind members what Standing Order 106 says, that a member of the state who has, or whose spouse or civil partner or cohabitee has, an interest in the subject matter of a proposition must, A, if it is a direct financial interest, declare the interest and withdraw from the chamber for the duration of the debate and any vote of the proposition. B, if it is not a direct financial interest, but a financial interest which is general, indirect, or shared with a large class of persons, declare the interest. If it is an interest which is not financial, declare the interest. All declarations must be made as soon as possible, and a financial interest in any subject matter is direct if it is immediate or personal to the person concerned. So that's what Standing Order 106 says.
So the question, sir, is the matter before the Assembly, sir, was the setting of a minimum wage.
Yes.
And therefore, any decisions to bring the minimum wage upwards to levels that might compromise the financial interest, which I think is the issue that Deputy Gorst, as External Relations Minister, was making. It's a could, not a will, and that's why, out of abundance of caution, so I made my declaration, because basically we're in the unknown.
Yes, I follow what you're saying. Yes, as the proposition has no direct effect on any person's financial interests, then the proposition as currently drawn, whether adopted or not, will only have an indirect financial interest. So in those circumstances, persons should declare that interest. They may, of course, if they wish, abstain, but they may, if they wish, contribute to the debate and vote. As at this stage, it does not give rise to any member having a direct financial interest in the outcome of this debate.
I'm grateful for your ruling, sir.
So may I speak? My wife and I have financial interests in hospitality business, but I voted for the increase, and I do understand that this is already in law. This is already. Did you not say, Minister, that
Through the chair.
Through the chair, I beg your pardon.
You have voted and you were entitled to vote, but we note your interest.
That's fine. Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, Deputy Curtis.
Thank you. So I think people are pretty much declaring if they're employers who pay anything, is we've changed the consultation right. So I can declare I am an employer, but I will state that is above the minimum, the living wage. So I'm an employer. So.
I did, in concert with the previous speaker, I'm an employer, but not below the minimum wage. Thanks.
I'm an employer as well, sir.
Deputy Kovacs?
Similarly, my husband and I have a business in hospitality, but as the constable said, voting poor cancels any financial possible gain on.
So I'm a director of a company that does employ people.
Yes, thank you very much. Deputy Moore.
So my husband and I employ people, but well above the living wage, so.
Thank you. Deputy Scott.
So I employ somebody part-time but above the living wage. If it's employment, she's self-employed.
Thank you very much. Sorry, there's someone online. Deputy Porre, yes. Do you want to make a declaration?
Yes, I would like to declare that I also run a business and I do pay my staff already above the living wage. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Yes, Minister, do you wish to propose the articles in second reading?
Yes, sir.
En bloc. Are the articles seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the articles in second reading? Deputy Joseph.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry that I've made my declaration of interest, and I'm pleased that other members have also, for the avoidance of it's the kind of issue that members of the public would want us to adhere to in terms of declarations, as indirect as it is. And in this third reading, may I ask that the Minister, in now having got approval of the Assembly to not consult with the bodies that she had to previously, and will unilaterally be able to set the minimum wage herself. It is currently regarded as the minimum wage, so under legislation. I know it's going to be moving to the level of the living wage, but I don't need to be corrected by a deputy because the legislation says minimum wage, as I recall, sir. Now, my issue in the third reading that I would ask the Minister to take account of is whether or not there is an adherence to the minimum wage by all employers in the island, having regard to the offsets. And I just asked the Minister if she is aware of some concerns that I have heard myself of offsets not being appropriate in terms of the living wage. The living wage, the minimum wage is what it says. It's a minimum hourly rate of which only social security, income tax and lodging and living accommodation can be done. But as I understand it, that there are other offsets that are falling below that of the minimum wage, and there is probably a widespread issue that the Minister may want to be seized upon. It's certainly something which a scrutiny panel has brought to the attention of the Assembly too, and I'm very concerned about it.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the articles in second reading? I call upon the Minister to reply. Minister.
Thank you, sir. Just to answer Deputy Ozef's question, if he is aware of any issues with regard to the treatment of offsets, I would encourage him or any other member to bring them to my attention so that they can be dealt with appropriately within the employment legislation.
Is the appel called for in second reading?
Yes, sir.
Appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. Thank you. I announce the articles have been adopted in second reading. 33 votes pour, 7 votes contre, and 4 abstentions. Minister, do you wish to propose the draft law in third reading?
Yes, sir.
Is the draft law seconded in third reading? Yes, sir. Does any member wish to speak on the articles as adopted in third reading? Yes, Deputy Tellier.
Thanks, sir. So, in the third reading, can I welcome this proposal from the Minister? I think that for too long the minimum wage has been able to be used as a political football because what we've effectively done is abdicated what is essentially a highly political matter, one for politicians such as ourselves to take to an independent body which gives considerations after a period of consultation, the consultation which necessarily, I think, does give priority to hearing from employers, and that's not a criticism of the employers simply, but they are well organised and able to make submissions, and often the voice of those workers is not always amplified to the extent it should be. And it is right, as we know, that various governments, not just in Jersey, seeking election, seeking a mandate, do put cost of living issues very much at the forefront, often of their manifestos. And so it's right that any new government coming in should be able to fulfil those political promises if and when they occur and when they have a mandate. I know not all will agree with that, but I think that is the correct position. And simply the last point I would make, the second and last point, is that let's get back to the philosophy of what this proposition is ultimately about, is that if we have a minimum wage which is set below the living wage and we allow that to continue into the future, what we are ultimately saying is that as an assembly we are content with poverty wages. We are content with people working for an amount that is actually less than it costs them to live, which is positively Victorian as a concept. And I think even Victorians would have struggled with that concept, which they certainly did. And we know that there were many good social reformers at that time, not least Pierre Le Sueur from St Helier as constable, who is one of the notable local reformers in that respect. So I do hope that in the third reading we might all come together to support what the Minister is trying to do here, and that in the future, when we talk about the minimum wage and the living wage, that will actually be exactly the same thing. And simply we'll be talking about what is the living wage, how much do you need in Jersey to survive, to make ends meet, before you talk about any kind of aspiration for workers in Jersey.
Thank you, Deputy. Does anyone wish to speak on the articles as adopted? Deputy Ferry.
Yes, just following on from the last speaker, the Employment Forum is constituted of 3 employer representatives, 3 employee representatives, and 3 independent representatives. So there is the voice from both employer and employee in that forum. Equally, in the past, when we did consultations, compliance inspectors from Social Security met face-to-face with minimum wage earners and went through the consultation process with them so that their voice could be heard. I do agree with the Deputy in as much as employer voices are louder and perhaps easier to hear because they're more plugged into what's going on. But the forum itself visited farms, visited hospitality businesses to hear firsthand from employees in those situations as to how their situation could be improved. We even visited some of the accommodation that farm workers in particular resided in. So we made every effort to contact employees and hear their voice and certainly make sure that they were in the mix as part of the consultation process. So I do refute the assertion that employees were not heard from. They absolutely were heard from. During COVID, of course, that became more difficult and perhaps it wasn't picked up as well as it should have been afterwards. But it was very much in the Employment Forum's mind that we had to hear from across the spectrum when setting the right level of minimum wage for Jersey, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak? Yes, Deputy Ozer.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry to rise again and in the third reading, but I think that it is important that in setting what will be the minimum wage without consultation, and I entirely agree with my fellow deputy from St Saviour that there have been the voices heard from individuals. My concern is the experience of other jurisdictions where there has been a failed experiment in the UK, certainly, of effectively promising a living wage and then effectively failing the economic situation of the United Kingdom by the link with immigration. And it's a very difficult issue to say, but you can't have your cake and eat it. And there is an Economist article dated the 24th of August, which I will circulate to members, which explains in terms why Britain's failed experiment in boosting low-wage sectors hasn't worked. And it needs to be understood because it's absolutely linked with that of immigration, and it is the immigration issue which is of concern to me, and it is the minimum wages which are being permitted by the work permitted individuals which are the problem, and the offsets that are allowed. There is a big issue, and I believe it's currently a hidden issue. It's hidden from public view, and I urge the Minister in her further discussions, in her deliberations with other ministers, and particularly calling to mind the comments the Deputy Balash made about the importance of the agricultural industry, etc. There is a fiction about the living wage in terms of what it means and what it doesn't mean to some employers versus others. There is minimum wage legislation, but I wonder whether or not it is being adhered to for a certain section of our society, which are the migrant workers, and I doubt it. But I look forward to receiving some real thought that has been given to ministers about whether or not we are really, truly, and it's not an issue of Victorian period, we're in the Carolean period, sir, and I'm worried about a minimum wage in the Carolean period.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on the principles as adopted? Minister.
Thank you, sir. I will start with the points raised by Deputy Ozef around work permit holders. The Assembly, I'm sure, will be aware that I was on the scrutiny panel that looked into the work permit policy, and now I'm in a ministerial position. I do work collaboratively, and I will work closely with the Minister for Justice and Home Affairs to allay any issues that there may well be in relation to work permit holders. The other two speakers, Deputy Ferret and Deputy Tadier, I think were calling upon me to ensure that in this and other future consultations there was equal weight given to both employee voices as well as employer voices. I hope it gives both of those deputies some comfort to know that in my consultations I have also met with trade unions as well as employer representatives. It was one of the conversations that I have had with the chair of the Employer Forum, that notwithstanding all of the efforts that were very well described by Deputy Ferret, the forum isn't always able to consult with as many people as it has hoped for in the past, and I would hope that over the coming years we'll be able to work on that to ensure that voices are heard equally, and it's not just ones that have the loudest voices. To go back to Deputy Ozef's points, I think the point around the living wage and knowing it is being correctly applied and is a suitable wage to live, that's where we come down to the minimum income standards piece of work that I described earlier, and I hope that that gives the Deputy some comfort in that. Thank you, sir. I call for the appel.
The appel has been called for. I invite members to return to their seats. I invite the greffier to open voting. If all members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, I ask the greffier to close the voting. That the law has been adopted in third reading, 34 votes for, 7 votes contra, and 4 abstentions. The next item is fully funded education or training for all 16 to 18-year-olds, P.38, lodged by Deputy Gardner. The main respondent is the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning. Deputy Gardner, you have lodged an amendment. Do you wish for the proposition to be read as amended?
So as I'm raising, I'm thinking because I have had exchange with the minister when I offered two options for the amendment, and when I now reread the email, follow the exchange during the lunchtime, there are two paragraphs. One is, I would respectfully request you to put faith in me as a minister to deliver. On this basis, consider withdraw the proposition. If you do not share my confidence of my commitment to make change and want to continue with P.38 on this basis, then I will accept option 2. And option 2 was lodged as an amendment. Now, it's not about personalities, commitment, or faith. For me, it's the privacy from the Assembly. So as I speak, and after conversation with the Minister, I'm withdrawing my amendment, and I would debate my original proposition.
So you withdraw the amendment, and you wish the Assembly to consider your proposition as it was originally lodged. Yes, thank you, Grafia. Please read the proposition.
The states are asked to decide whether they are of opinion, A, that all 16 to 18-year-olds should be eligible for fully funded education or professional training in Jersey, and to request the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning to implement any necessary changes to the existing provision prior to September 2025. B, to request the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning to include any necessary long-term additional funding within the Government Plan 2026 to 29. And C, to request the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning to undertake a review of education legislation and policy with a view to increasing participation in educational professional training for all young people up to the age of 18.
Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. And again, I would like to apologise for my speech before the members of the Assembly about some confusion. The difference between my amendment that I thought that the Minister accepted was a compromise was that paragraph A was taken out. And paragraph A, it's the policy intention, which is asking for 16 to 18 should be eligible for fully funded education or professional training in Jersey. Reflecting on this, the part A can be done by the Minister without bringing the long legislative change, and can be done quicker and can be done within government plan. When we agreed the amendment, I said, okay, we can have a policy and legislative change in one thing, and if members were considering to vote to paragraph for my amended proposition, it would be paragraph B and C. So the main difference that happened when would be a compromise, that I withdraw paragraph A, but I do believe it's important to the debate. And I would like to read a quote. It's not my quote. It's a quote from the Deputy Ward blog from 18th of May 23, under the name, "The Slow Death of the Democratic Assembly." What are the consequences of believing that propositions are unnecessary for the government? First of all, we lose the unique democracy we have in Jersey, where non-government, now called non-executive members of the Assembly, can bring any proposition and have it debated within 6 weeks. This is important and unique as it delivers direct democracy for members of our society, and it gives unique and responsible roles to all members of the Assembly. We can make genuine change, or at least attempt to. And remember one fact: the Assembly has primacy in the governance of our island. This is why for me it was important to bring this debate about education, funding for education for 16 to 18-year-olds to this Assembly. It hasn't been debated in this Assembly for a long time, several terms. At least for ministers, including myself, and scrutiny, including Deputy Ward, we're working on it for the last 5 years. And what I found out when I lodged the proposition, when I had a discussion with the members, because it was between ministers and the scrutiny and not in the public domain, there are some facts that members were not aware. It is very complex. It is very complex. It's very difficult to put a formula together, and I know this. I'm going to ask a couple questions. Obviously, in the setting of the States Assembly, it's very difficult compared to the workshop to get the answers. And I would like that members will check, are they aware and what they're thinking about this position on the island. At the moment, A-level students in government schools get the full course of their education. It's an average between £7,500 to £8,000 a year per student funded by the taxpayer. Again, because formula is very complex, I have seen the number too, but it's, if you're taking the total budget of school, how much whole school received a year and how many students a year, we can calculate approximately. It may be a bit more, a bit less, but it's between 7,000 to 8,000 a year. But students doing apprenticeship training only get £1,600 towards the cost of their courses. It's an average 3 times less than the cost of the course. If members are aware about this, maybe yes, maybe no, we call it tracker, and if you would track my written question 24, confirm this. What does it mean that students doing apprenticeship training will get some funds that will be reallocated within the system? Some of them expenses will be paid by the employers to match the cost of the course, and some will be self-funded. In the answer to one of the written questions, 14 students didn't go through because the funding is run out. I'm not sure it's the right situation for Jersey. Vocational student, okay, this is the first fact, and check how much you were aware about these facts, because I also learned it. I would like now members, if they have proposition in front of them or on their computers or devices, to open report to my proposition on page 8. On page 8, you can find a table that I have calculated based on the answers from the Minister to written question 23 and written question 113. And you can see how much funding was allocated, for example, for childcare, number of the students, actual course per learner, and what is the deficit. The deficit needs to be covered. Sometimes it's covered from the funds, sometimes it's not. And again, the differences in cost per course are linked to the different numbers of learning hours. I'm saying again that numbers are not precise. The funding allocation cannot be accurately compared due to the difference in methodology. In fact, it is acknowledged it's really complex, and we need to find the old jigsaw puzzles. I have seen the numbers, but it was ministerial submissions, and it's a policy in development, so the numbers are not shared in the public, but I definitely know there is a deficit in the funding for the vocational education and apprenticeship. It was also highlighted, not by me, in the actionable agenda. It was independent review of the school funding concluded that 16 to 18-year-old at Highlands College received less per capita funding than the same group in schools, including Hollyer. This has clear implication for the regard in which vocational education is held compared to academic provision, and it's deeply unfair given overall level of disadvantage among students at the college. The cost of the apprenticeship provision in Jersey is notably opaque and most likely significantly underfunded, being effectively cross-subsidized from other funding schemes within the Highlands College. And this is a quote from the actionable agenda independent review school funding that was published previously. And this is the first paragraph A, which actually talking, are we as a states would like to support the minister and would like to make sure that regardless of the path that young people are taking, their education will be funded fully. We can see that most of their vocational courses, they're around £5,400. Now, I'm moving now to paragraph C, because there was another confusion there. What is participation age? Because we don't have in our laws participation age as the term. There is a substantial difference between compulsory education and participation. It's not mandatory. I don't believe in mandatory. But I do believe that the young people and their parents should not be fined, but strongly encouraged, and it's government duty to fund. Jersey is outliner from the UK and most of OECD countries where education and training are funded until 18. Participation age in the UK was raised to 18 in 2013. UK law requires young people to continue some form of education or professional training until the age 18. There are multiple options available in the UK: to study full-time at school, college, and training provider. And it's full-time education, 540 hours. Full-time employment or volunteering. A full-time is counted less than 20 hours a week. And enrollment in apprenticeship or traineeship or supported internship. And this is the legislative change. The education law would need to be changed. It might take longer. We see there is a big and complex way forward, but it is possible, and it's important because it's on the cards for a long time. This proposition does not mention reducing funding to A-levels. To affect in any shape or form A-levels funding, it's important that A-levels funding will remain. It is important as academic, yes. This proposition does not propose and open new courses or pay for courses that are not economically viable. This proposition proposes simple policy direction and intention, and if this assembly believes that we need to bridge the gap and make fair that all 16 to 18 will be funded regardless the path that they choose. I believe this is the right time for the Assembly to express their views and to debate provision for the funding and take decisive steps with regards to the education provision for the young people who are the island's future. And I'm looking for the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Deputy Tadia.
Thank you, sir. So I think I was taken by surprise, probably as most members, that the amendment was being withdrawn, and so we revert to the original proposition. And I must admit that when I first read this, and as I still do read it, I find that I don't really know how to react to Part A, because I think it's quite revolutionary. Because what it seems to be proposing to me is one, potentially a blank cheque here, and two, that we should actually potentially be nationalising all of our sixth form provision in Jersey, and actually ultimately abolishing fee-paying schools in Jersey. Because of course, if we read the wording of the proposition, it says that all 16 to 18-year-olds in Jersey, so that's all of them, not some of them, should be eligible for fully funded education or professional training in Jersey. And then, of course, it talks about bringing funding forward in Part B. So that means if you were a student at Victoria College or De La Salle or Bowlia or JCG or St Michael's, that you can then turn to the Minister and say, well, actually, the Assembly's passed a proposition yesterday, and you've agreed to fully fund my daughter or my son's education in Jersey. Thank you very much for that. So here's the bill. And of course, it would be questionable as to why anybody who's 16 to 18 and has children at those schools would want to therefore pay for an education for their children when the government is offering to pay for it for free. Now, that's how I read what's being proposed there, because that's what it says, which is interesting, because I remember before the last elections I had some quite interesting policy debates with a running mate of mine. He won't mind me saying it, I'm sure, about what we should do with the fee-paying schools in an ideal world. One school of thought has always been that if they're fee-paying, then they should be completely fee-paying, and we should remove the subsidies from those schools. And of course, the downside of that would be that they become properly elite in a sense, because it would only be the ones who could really afford to send their children there who could do it, because the fees would be so much more expensive. And his suggestion was actually, well, have you considered doing it the other way around and actually making the sixth form colleges entirely free, so that everybody can get a free education at those what are somewhat selective schools, and you could argue are somewhat elitist schools at the moment. And that is what Deputy Gardner's proposing here. So I think it is quite radical, and the socialist in me thinks that maybe that is the way to go. Maybe we should go that way, but I'm not sure if necessarily it's been costed, and that the Minister has necessarily got the budget and would necessarily get support from the rest of the Council of Ministers to do that, even if he were minded to do that himself. So I will be looking forward to what the Minister's got to say on this. I know that the Minister is himself progressive, but I don't know if he's quite that progressive or that bold at the moment to want to abolish all of the fee-paying schools in Jersey. So I wait to hear from him, but if that's the direction he wants to take us in, then I'm willing to entertain it. If he can find the money, of course, because it needs to be fiscally responsible.
Deputy Wall.
Thank you, sir. It's an interesting speech to follow, Deputy Tadier. Education, sir, is about hope. Giving people of all backgrounds the opportunity to succeed in any walk of life they choose. Giving them hope is a powerful word. The importance of education is also recognised by my political colleagues, and I quote, "Education is the greatest investment a government can make in its people. Reform Jersey wishes to see an education system which enables every islander to reach their full potential and provides opportunities for everyone to gain the skills they need to thrive in the modern economy. We must address the false separation between academic and vocational education that does not fit modern economies. We will seek to widen the scope of qualifications offered to embrace the need for vocational training for the island's needs and the changing needs of a digital world. Hope. Let's then take a look at what the proposition is asking. Part A is asking the Assembly to agree that all 16 to 18-year-olds to be eligible for fully funded education or training in the island. Jersey, it states, is an outlier in several respects in relation to 16 to 18 education. The legally presumed age for leaving education and or training is still 16. In all of the nations of the UK, the participation age is now 18. The same is true for most European nations. Since when did Jersey become an outlier? Is this really the message we want to send to our young people? We constantly hear of islanders forced to leave the place of their birth. The biggest reason, the cost of living. There is a clear correlation between better education and better economic outcomes, and that's borne out by figure 32 in the report of this proposition. I therefore find it extraordinary that Deputy Ward, who constantly reminds this Assembly that when we talk about education, we should see it as an investment and not as a cost to our society, cannot find it within himself to support this proposition. I hope he will explain to all those 16 to 18-year-olds what it is he has against giving them the opportunity to prosper in our society. I remind him, education is about hope. I look across at my colleague, the Minister, well, I would do if he was here, the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development, in the hope that he understands the economic consequences of not investing in our young people. I do hope that he has a speech prepared, I'm assuming he doesn't as he's not in the Assembly, that demonstrates his understanding that what happens in education very much impacts on his portfolio. This is a cross-cutting issue, and the relevant minister must stand up and be counted. Next, I turn to the housing minister, who spoke about the inequity of the two-tiered housing market in a recent speech, and I ask him, how does he think rejecting this proposition helps his portfolio? Instead of investing in our own society, for whom the two-tier housing market is irrelevant, we instead carry on, as we've always done, relying on importing the labour we refuse to train in-house, thereby perpetuating the very issue he so eloquently derides. A typical case of exploiting problems but not solving them. Does no one in the current government have the vision to see that supporting this proposition, as originally set out, gives hope to islanders? They desperately want to see a government willing to invest in their future. Education is about hope, and so is politics. I urge members to support the young people of this island and to support the original proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Scott.
So, and these were a couple of points of order rather than speech. Because first, this interpretation of A, which I had read the same way as Deputy Tadier, we are to read this that basically any child over the age of 16 will have their school fees funded, even if they are in private education. Could we please confirm that? I'd like to understand. And two, if this is the case, should we not be declaring any conflicts of interest, those of us who've got children in private education locally at the moment?
I'm not sure, sorry if I can.
Yes, Deputy Garner, do you want to make?
Yes, I would like to make a comment.
So I'm not sure if this is...
No, I want like for an interpretation of the proposition as I understand it, not as the member interprets it. I want to understand what I am voting for, please.
Yes, Deputy Scott. Well, I think the easy part is your second question, which is whether people who have 16 to 18-year-olds in private education should make a declaration of interest. I think the answer to that question is yes. Whether or not at this stage it's right for me to rule that paragraph A has the effect that it is suggested it may have, namely if adopted and by the Assembly and then implemented, it would mean that there would be fully funded education for 16 to 18-year-olds, and that means effectively free education for 16 to 18-year-olds isn't something I think is appropriate for me to express an opinion on at this stage in the debate, and possibly at all. Members will need to have to make their mind up as to what is intended by paragraph A. Not heard from the proposer in her closing remarks to the Assembly, so I don't think I can give you any assistance in relation to how I think members ought to interpret subparagraph A. Members will need to look at that subparagraph themselves. But I do agree in the circumstances, having regard to the potential effect of paragraph A, if adopted and then subject to legislation or some other form of implementation, it is appropriate for members to indicate whether or not they have 16 to 18-year-old children who might benefit from subparagraph A if it's adopted and has the effect that you and others have suggested it might.
So why would that be limited to 16-year-olds if somebody's got a 15-year-old who may next year be 16?
I suppose you're right about that. It might affect any. Yes, in that case, it applies to anyone with a child under the age of 18 who may attend a fee-paying school in due course.
Sir, can I raise a point?
Yes, absolutely, yes.
So could I ask for your interpretation, given the use of the word eligible for in that section? Eligible for implies to me, is the current situation, that all 16 to 18-year-olds are eligible currently for free education in a secondary school, namely Holia, and therefore there is no change implied in the current situation with regard to private school. No necessary change implied in any case.
That's another interpretation, which is why I haven't given any direction as to.
So may I ask?
Direction as to what 16 this paragraph means. Yes, Deputy Rob Ward.
So I think what people may be being confused about, and certainly when I speak I'll cover this, is the phrase fully funded. So everyone's eligible, but not everyone's fully funded in terms of the funding from education. Some are part funded through grants, some part funded through the estates assisted process. So it's the fully funded phrase.
Yes. I mean, fully funded by whom is the question as well. There are all sorts of.
I think it's my department, sir, to be quite frank.
Well, so may I continue the point of order? I'd suggest that's exactly why we're here, to have the debate on what this.
Yes, I don't think it's for me to tell members what this particular subparagraph means, as there's a spectrum of opinions as to what it means. Yes, Deputy Gorst.
So in light of your ruling, I fear I must do nothing other than declare I apparently have a conflict because I've got daughters under the age of 18.
I don't.
Yes. Anyone else?
So does the declaration fall into the category of being so broad as to be shared by a large section of society? Because I think it is so broad that it would be a slight nonsense to have to declare an interest. But I'm happy to be directed on that.
Yes, well, this proposition does not have direct effect in the sense it's asking for members to decide if their opinion that 16 to 18-year-olds should be eligible for fully funded education. It does not have that immediate effect, whatever that means. And accordingly, I rule that it is not a direct financial interest, but a financial interest that it's general, indirect, or share with a large class of persons. Nonetheless, under Standing Order 106B, you still need to declare the interest, but it does mean that you're able to participate in the debate and vote on the proposition. Attorney General, is your light on? Any particular reason? Good, all right. Well, you can't declare an interest because you can't vote. Deputy Moore.
Sir, given your ruling, I shall declare that I have one child remaining who is under the age of 18.
Yes.
9 chairs.
Deputy Kovacs.
Equally, I have 2 under 18.
Yes. Deputy Feltham.
I have one daughter who is 10.
Deputy Curtis.
I have a son who is 17.
Thank you. Deputy Chair.
Yeah, 2 boys, I'm not quite sure their age, but they're under 18.
Perhaps you can find out tonight when you get home. Deputy Stevenson.
I have children, sir, under 18.
Good. Conor Tyler, St Mary.
I have no children under 18, but I have grandchildren under 18. Now I
don't think we're going to do. We're not doing grandchildren. Deputy Brenoff.
Yes, sir, I have 2 children in the state system.
Thank you, Deputy Gardner.
I have a child under 18.
Yes.
2 grandchildren, sir.
I don't think we need to do grandchildren. Deputy Howell. Deputy Howell, you want to declare an interest? Maybe not. Deputy Dublé?
There I have a child under the age of 18.
Yes. All right. Who wants to speak next on this proposition? Deputy Catherine Curtis.
Thank you, sir. As chair of the Children Education and Home Affairs Scrutiny Panel, I can confirm that the whole panel is very concerned about education and training opportunities for all young people. Personally, while I very much appreciate Deputy Gardner's intention in bringing this proposition, I believe that the Education Minister is already working on plans to support young people in education and training, and therefore this proposition at this time is unnecessary. And there is also some confusion regarding paragraph A, so I am not minded to support the proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak? Deputy Mezek.
Thank you, sir. I was particularly grateful to listen to Deputy Ward quoting extensively from our manifesto earlier. It's wonderful to hear him talk such good sense. Speaking of sense, sir, unfortunately I struggle to find much of it when I look at this proposition and in particular how it's worded. Of course, sir, the aspiration for a properly funded education system, we'll get to health another day, properly funded education system, and I use the word properly rather than fully for nuanced reasons that I'll come to in a moment, is obviously something that's in the vital interests of the island's social and economic well-being to ensure that every young person has the ability to achieve their potential, whatever that potential is. So this use of the term fully funded is highly confusing, and it's abundantly clear from the questions that have been asked so far that it's not clear what it means. So as the system currently stands for children below the age of 16, there is already a great deal of inefficiency and inequity in how funding for their education is distributed, and yet they're not considered in this proposition. So there are the various formula for working out how much funding is allocated per pupil, and it highly varies across the state system. So you have those who are in the fee-paying schools, whether they're fully private or the state-owned ones, who have a different formula attached to how their tuition is funded from public funds, to those in the state system. And of course, we have the pupil premium, where extra funding is allocated. So which of those is the fully funded one? Are those who aren't eligible for pupil premium getting shortchanged and not being fully funded? Of course not, because the system has all sorts of variances in them to ensure that the proper funding goes to them. So it is absolutely not clear what she's even asking for in this proposition. So it's also the case, sir, that a young person going through the education route of an apprenticeship as opposed to an A-level is having a kind of different style of education that for their day-to-day life and how they're educated is different to that of their A-levels, in that they are spending amount of their time working, and there is an employer contribution to their life as they're being educated, which of course you don't get whilst you're doing your A-levels, apart from possibly from a Saturday job, and that doesn't count as part of your formal education in that sense then. So are we suggesting, if it's to be fully funded, that those going through apprenticeships no longer get paid by the employers for that, but instead get paid by taxpayers' funds for that time? maybe that's a brilliant idea, maybe it's not, I don't know, but I'm certainly none the wiser for having listened to Deputy Gardner's opening speech on this, where I don't think an adequate case on it was made at all. So, it is an imperative, I think, that Part A be rejected and something better thought through comes back to the Assembly in one form or another, preferably by the Minister, but from wherever anything comes, I hope it's better written than Part A here. Part B, of course, naturally follows Part A and is the normal funding process for these things anyway, so it's superfluous if you're rejecting Part A. So Part C, of course, is tempting. You could look at it and argue that it causes no harm, and I won't begrudge any member that reads it and thinks that too. But it must be acknowledged that it is superfluous, and the evidence for this is provided in the comments to the amendment which Deputy Ward was able to publish, where he cited Hansard, where he's been asked in this Assembly about this particular policy area, and has already to some degree outlined the initial aspects of his plan, which is that he's going to do this anyway, and that we can all eagerly wait in anticipation, because it's not actually going to be that long before he produces that anyway. So in that sense, Part C of the proposition is a complete and utter waste of time and simply asks us to affirm what is happening anyway. The Minister has been absolutely clear about that. So, Sir, I hope members will reject all parts of this proposition, and we can move on to other debates and get a better use out of our time, because what we have before us, I'm sorry to say, has been completely incoherent.
Thank you, Dave. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. I might well say something about the position of the economy, given that there was a bit of a pop taken at the Minister for Sustainable Economic Development for not being in the room. But of course, he supports skills training. Of course, I believe we all do. And I'm absolutely sure and confident that our own Minister for Education does. And I think what I'm seeing is in this proposition there's a lot that need not be said, which means one has to question why it's here in the first place. When I read A, I find it's a bit meaningless that 16 to 18-year-olds should be eligible for fully funded education, which I believe they are, or professional training. Well, maybe if those words alone might, but here we go. I'm trying to rewrite this proposition to make it meaningful, and in the end, I conclude it's not. It's just not meaningful. And more than that, that in the introduction that was given by the member, Deputy Gardner, in her speech, she read some correspondence with the Minister that more or less indicated that if she didn't have confidence in him, she would take a certain action. And I feel like I'm being asked to express a vote of confidence now in the Minister for Education by, I vote for this, which I really feel I am confident that this is somebody who is very incredibly passionate about supporting education. And if this is a meaningless proposition, or even something that's saying, right, okay, we support education, my concern is that I don't really feel comfortable about supporting a proposition that basically at the end of the day is just something a deputy might wave around and saying, I got this, aren't I, isn't that great for me? When in fact it was happening anyway. So whilst I admire anyone who supports education, I won't be supporting this proposition.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other wish to speak on the principles? Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. I could wait and play the game, but I think that we need to put our, if I may use the footballing terms, we need to put our foot on the ball here a little and recognise what we're actually doing here. Let's bring this debate back to the sort of level it should be at in this Assembly, which is about the proposition, the wording, the implications, and what we're actually trying to do as an Assembly, and what I am actually trying to do as Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning, something added to the remit, which I will bring up from the beginning. So there are a couple of things I'll start with, because I've got a melange of speeches here, because I wasn't expecting the amendment to be withdrawn in this way. And I apologise to members for not circulating the comments paper on the original proposition, which is here, because I didn't think we'd be debating the original proposition. So I recirculated what is the relevant comments paper, because it's unusual for a member to remove their own amendment to their proposition at the last minute, and so I do apologise for members that we could not circulate that, but I will try to explain as much as possible. I will also try to keep your attention at the end of a long day, which is going to be a challenge, but so I've done that for 25 years, we'll try it again. So one of the things that I must mention is the conversations I've had with officers in terms of the demands that we made through propositions that are coming. And so when speaking to officers and working on P12, the last amendment that was brought to direct education for me, and I paraphrase, a review of the relevant laws outlining ministerial obligations and powers related to post-16 education has commenced. However, this work has been paused to prioritise the commitments made following adoption of P1224, in which Deputy Gardner committed me to review several elements of the law governing entitlement financial support for higher education. While the review of education law is temporarily paused, it is important to note that at an operational level, work is still underway in this area. Specifically, Skills Jersey are diligently enhancing existing wraparound services for early intervention with a focus on students at the risk of disengagement. This aligns with the goals of the future policy work related to the age of participation, specifically by providing support and encouragement to students to remain in education. So an enormous amount is going on, trying to balance the directional propositions that are coming forward. And I recognise that there were things brought to the last Council of Ministers by the Minister that were simply not accepted around apprentice funding. So the last Council of Ministers rejected those. I'm having to look at these issues myself. However, there is one difference, and that is the fact that I do have a strong commitment to education. I care enormously about every single child that we teach. And so I will rise above comments which I might consider to be slightly personal and ill-informed. But we, sir, in leadership, one has to take that on board and one has to lead the way, not follow. So I would ask members to reject this for many reasons. I will start by making clear that simply making some amendments would be tinkering with the fundamentally forward position and would make for bad decision making. That's why the decision to reject the amendment was taken. And so I will say that I went to Council of Ministers regarding the amendment to say that we can probably accept it. It's not doing anything. And I was somewhat hoisted by my own petard by certain members who suggested that before I have said we should not be accepting amendments that do nothing just for the sake of accepting an amendment and making things easier. And so I agreed with that. So what I've demonstrated, in my leadership, I'm willing to change those simple things with unity. And so what was nice was to have the support and the confidence around the Council of Ministers. I did email the Deputy and ask her to have that same confidence in me. That's obviously not there. But I hope that in the next few months and year or so, I can gain that confidence from the Deputy and those who will probably speak to undermine that confidence today. And I really will work hard to do that. So Part A of the proposition does state that all 16 to 19-year-olds should be eligible for fully funded educational professional training in Jersey, and to request myself to implement any necessary changes to the existing provision prior to September 2025. Let's talk about the details now. This creates huge ambiguity on who all 16 to 18-year-olds refer to. The debate we've gone through, which got somewhat farcical at times, so when everyone having to declare that they have a child. So I have two children that are older than that, so I should declare that they might feel left out. I love them dearly, sir. As indeed, sir, I love my wife. So I've now got her into Hansard, as Tepley Coles did. So that's another one ticked off the box. But in addition, sir, the word prior to September 25 leads to serious issues. And let's start. The timescale is unrealistic. 3 months to implement for the academic year 2024, because anything prior to 2025 will have to start at the beginning of the previous academic year. That's the way schools work. So, and I have a huge knowledge of the way schools work. Funding issues. I have inherited funding from the last government plan where money for this change was not included. Indeed, sir, I believe that bids for this were refused twice from the last Council of Ministers. To implement any change prior to 2025 raises the question of which service should monies be diverted from. And we could be putting money into education that already exists and is running absolutely effectively, like the apprenticeships at Highlands College. And so I want to say clearly, the apprenticeships at Highlands College are extraordinarily successful and they are working very, very well. I would also add, sir, and I'll add it at this point, it might be in my speech again, but repetition doesn't help, doesn't hurt. So in response to the report that the Deputy referred to about higher education, Highlands received recurring funding of £900,000 from recommendation 2 of that report towards delivering training. So that gap in funding was identified and was addressed. So I will say as well that we have to be very careful with what we wish for. I know that as a head of science, I used to fund science probably at a higher level than other subjects that were simpler because it was more expensive to fund science. That is true in any institution. And if we adopt a sort of zero-based budgeting approach for apprenticeships and other courses up at Highlands, we are at risk of losing some of those courses because they will not wipe their feet. I think, is that the phrase, sir? Wipe their feet? I think it is. Wipe their face. That's it. Thank you for the signal. Wipe their feet. Face. I said it again. They will not wipe their face. And so we end up with a very divided approach. And the notion that because some money is diverted from some areas of the college to apprenticeships is the problem of funding elsewhere. It simply demonstrates a lack of understanding of the way these institutions work and the complexity of a multi-million-pound institution delivering education for thousands of students all of the time. And that is a real issue that we have to address. If Highlands College, as an institution, want to change their funding model, we will talk about that and we will come up with the best funding model. And that's an effective way to do it. It does not specify this proposition, sir, the type of education or restricted provision for publicly funded schools. Estimated costs only relate to apprenticeships, and I reiterate that we vote on the wording of the proposition. We are not here today to vote on what ifs and maybes. It's the wording of the proposition and the implications of that wording. And we have to think very carefully about what you are doing when you do that. People already mentioned about the paid private schools. Trying to carve out a specific set of courses does not work. School and college funding enables the school leaders to have flexibility for their provision. Having said that, sir, in order to target, and the lifelong learning remit is very important to me, one of the actions that are already being taken with the help of the Social Security Minister is to remove the critical skills list from Social Security law and give me, if you like, control over that critical skills list in conjunction with the Economic Department to actually identify what skills and what training is needed on this island long term. In that way, we can direct the extra funding that comes from the CSP commitment that I made to lifelong learning towards that training to improve where we are in the island and to improve provision on this island. These propositions stand in the way of that with a simplified view of the way in which we fund. We need to be more intelligent in what we're funding. We need to be more intelligent in the way we address that funding. And I urge members to consider that point alone and reject this proposition to begin with. And so is age-related entitlement the best approach? What if a student is ill until they're 19 years of age? It's a serious issue, and the reason why the additional lifelong learning remit. What about people who are older than 16? Are they not going to receive any sort of funding for courses? Because that might be the only way in which we will train the people that we want to. Earlier today, sir, I answered the questions about nurseries, and I'm trying to encourage people who are not so young, I'm not going to use the O word, not so young, to perhaps return to the workforce and train in a particular way. This type of proposition that directs significant amounts of funding, undefined, sir, no idea how much this is going to cost. I'd say to members, please be careful on what you're voting on. You're voting for a blank cheque, which I simply don't have. in order to, and that will get in the way of that change that we desperately need. So there's another implication of this. So there should be a target attainment level. It said, this is exactly what we're developing. Let's make sure we draw everybody's attainment level and ability level up to what is needed for the island and what enables people to really succeed in life. So apprenticeships are paid. Students are able to learn while they're studying. A-levels are full-time. Students are not able to learn while they're studying, apart from part-time jobs, and many of them do those. So we are comparing like with like, sir. And I think that's a very important point. And I would say that, yes, there are, I think, one of the issues about charging for apprenticeships. So the charges for apprenticeships for some employers, they are very low, about £20 a week in order to access that education. I don't know if anyone in this assembly, sir, has managed to get training for £20 a week, because I haven't. And the effectiveness of that training is quite important. Also, some employers are quite happy to pay that because they can say to their employees, I'm paying for you to go to college, make sure you turn up for college and make sure you do well. Plus, there's the fact that we cover the cost of many of the exams and many of the assessments, which can be extremely expensive. And so the system that is in place is effective. Yes, we will make changes, but we will do that in a sustained, planned, considered and intelligent way that addresses the needs of this island so that we can have a long-term improvement to our workforce. And that's what I want to do as Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning. So, Part B requests me to additional funding in the government plan. So I can't really say which funding this will be from this proposition, because I have absolutely no idea how to cost it. It could be massively significant in the government plan. Also, sir, as we develop the government plan, which is happening at the moment, we're already looking at CSP priorities on lifelong learning. And I hope with that, and even the supporting of the minimum wage, some of that will go towards training. So there are many aspects that we are trying to develop which will address exactly this issue, not this simplified version. We're restructuring the skills into direct Highlands line management and the use of the excellent work to direct funding as to where it's best targeted. And it's a much more effective approach than the generic funding, which has already been put in place. And so I say again, I mentioned the thing about cross-funding in all educational establishments. And I say to anybody who's been involved in a large institution trying to deliver training, because there's very little profit in training, it's spend and it's outcomes which are less tangible, more esoteric in the long term. There's a lovely word I managed to throw into my speech today. In the long term, sir, that you have to cross-fund within those organisations. I'll give you an example, sir. There was a period in the UK when the UK government were obsessed with changing qualifications. They thought they would change them just about every year. I personally think it's because the exam boards were making an absolute fortune out of it. And when it hit a subject within a school, that school had to have extra funding at that time in order to address that change. If there was no flexibility in the way that schools could fund, that course would have been lost, or they would not have been completing that course. Take away flexibility, you put institutions at risk. So the Independent School Funding Review recommendation that addressed the levelling up of funding between vocational and academic education. This was subsequently referenced in the FE and Skills Actionable Agenda. That's the point I'm repeating, sir, but there's another point there. This has been implemented with £900,000 allocated to Highlands, the final tranche of which has just been allocated in the last few weeks and months. So that money has gone into education. We can also add the skill funds, now called a scheme, and I might be quite critical of the funding on that because it is not secured and it is not long-term. And that's what we're trying to do, come up with a funding formula that works. So Part C, I'm going to finish soon because I know I've gone on for too long. But so it's very important to me that I cover all of the points I possibly can, particularly given the somewhat vehement assumptions that are being made about my role, which I hope I can convince people otherwise. And the last part is about the review of education legislation and policy with a view to increasing participation in education. Successive ministers have not addressed that. I've been through this before. I've answered questions on this, written questions, oral questions to the scrutiny panel. I've given a very clear indication of what we're going to do, sir. We are going to make sure there is a sustainable approach to education, lifelong learning for every individual on this island. That's what we have to do in the long term. And then if we want to change the law to say up to 18, we can do that. It's not a problem. So, but there are nuances. I believe if you're on a Navy ship and you're only 16, 17, does that count as being in full-time education? Does apprenticeships count as being in full-time education? There are nuances that we have to address. It was also in ministerial plans 2 years ago, but wasn't acted upon. So, sir, we're currently looking at how changing the age of participation will best be implemented. Age-related or attainment-related, 1 year residency requirement, review of requirement to be living with parents or family member, immigration rules, who, what, where, and to whom is post-16 available for free. There are so many points that we are being addressing at the moment that officers are undertaking, all of which will be addressed at the appropriate time. Put simply, sir, we're already addressing Part C. So now I recognise, and I genuinely recognise, and I want to put this in the nicest possible way I can, and I recognise it's difficult to mid-term have change. I recognise that it's difficult mid-term to take on a role. But so I would urge the Assembly to reject this proposition, support me in the way where I want to move forward, support in the CSP priorities that I've made as Education Minister, support and have some faith in the idea that I am actually going to take these things forward. I'm very serious about taking these things forward, and the sustainable mechanism of funding is exactly what's going to happen. This proposition can be dangerous. It can be dangerous because it is undetermined. You'll be voting on something that is unsecured, is unsure, no idea where the money is coming from, no idea of the impact it's going to have, and will ride a coach and horses through the planning and the work that is going on in the department to really fundamentally address what we're doing in terms of learning beyond the age of 16. I urge members to reject this proposition, let me get on with the job, and then judge me on that in a year or so's time, and you're more than welcome to do that then. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Members, I should indicate that I recollected after giving the ruling I did under Standing Order 106 that Standing Order has been amended in its terms since the Standing Order that I read to members some time ago. It makes no effect on the ruling that I gave. Under the current version of Standing Order 106, a member must declare an interest, no reference to financial interest, an interest stating the nature of the interest if it is a matter the subject of a proposition and they are aware of that interest, so members were correct to declare the interest that they did. There's been a change in the, effectively the definition of a financial interest, removal of the reference to direct and indirect interests, and now in the event that the interest is a financial interest, which is either personal to the member or shared with a small number of other people, the member shall not vote on any proposition. And of course, none of the declarations met that test. So all members on both tests, the old one and the current one, are entitled to speak and vote on this proposition. Deputy Curtis, Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. It's quite hard following the main respondent because you've got far less to say and I've got far less surety to say it with. I don't know how I will vote on this one, so I raise more to ask some curious questions, knowing we will adjourn and knowing the proposer can come back with them later. We've heard challenges around words. We've heard about the importance of the principle, agreeing the words or otherwise. I would like to understand what eligibility is and what professional training is. I thought about the breadth of education that we could be talking about here, and one that came to mind, far less perhaps front of mind, would be, Jersey's got a wealth of dance schools. And many of our islanders go off to have careers in the arts, fruitful careers, very prosperous careers, and I look to members who have family who have that. But the provision for professional training between 16 and 18 for dance or theatre on island is probably quite limited for those looking for full-time education in that. But it's not to say it couldn't exist. And my question is a genuine one, is to what extent is eligibility intended here? Should it be about any qualification? And then once that's provided, is it the cheapest provider of that is met? Is it if one person offers an electrical qualification that's cheaper than another, it must be taken by the cheaper party? Is it only one provided by the government? And I don't know. And I would like to know more than just the technicals, some of the vision maybe from the proposer as to what she meant on this. Because it isn't clear. It isn't clear that if a professional qualification offered by only one provider on the island comes in at £15,000 per student because of the niche element of it, that the state should be obliged because eligibility for that can only be met by that provider. And if we are to define a scope, who right now should define that scope? And this is where often ministers or members bring some detail to that. But I do want to make a comment more on how this debate might be perceived outside the Assembly once a vote takes place, after, regardless of how it goes. And it's about how members comment as either members or the parties that operate here relay decisions made in this Assembly and what it does to having an informed and valuable debate. Members have already and no doubt will continue to outline varied positions, often one being said, I support the principle, but I will vote against for the reason X. It could be the wording, it could be because they don't want to support propositions they believe that has work already going on. And it's quite possible to imagine that Deputy Gardner or another member could publish a list of names who vote against and say these members do not support funding 16 to 18-year-olds for their education. Part of me says it might be in her right to do so because members have faced that on the other end. But I hope she doesn't. I want nuanced debate to continue, and I want members to articulate what their perspective on this proposition is, and regardless of how they vote, work together on the right solution.
Thank you, Deputy. Is any other Deputy?
May I propose the adjournment?
The adjournment's proposed. Seconded? Yes, sir. Are members content to adjourn now? The Assembly is adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow morning.